Welcome back to another story on Omni Wizard. This time, we're bringing you What If Spider-Man Found Harry Potter in the Cupboard and Trained Him Before Hogwarts. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1. The Cupboard. The assignment was supposed to be simple. That was what Peter Parker kept telling himself as he sat on the train from London Paddington, his camera bag wedged between his knees and a folded brief from the Daily Bugle's UK correspondent balanced on his thigh. Simple, suburban England. A piece on the so-called perfect British neighborhood, manicured lawns, identical houses, the kind of quiet that American readers apparently found either charming or terrifying depending on their disposition. Jameson had called it a human interest puff piece and assigned it to Peter specifically because he'd been making noise about wanting something low stakes after 6 months of photographing burning buildings and crumpled car hoods. Low stakes. Right. Peter watched the suburbs blur past the window and ate a packet of crisps he'd bought at the station, which tasted like someone had described salt and vinegar to a chemist who had never actually eaten food. Outside, the sky was the particular shade of English gray that seemed less like weather and more like a permanent architectural feature. He checked his map. Little winging, Surrey. Another 40 minutes. He spent the time doing what he always did when his hands weren't busy thinking. Specifically about the web fluid compound he'd been tinkering with for the past month, trying to improve its tensile strength without increasing the viscosity, because the last batch had been slightly too thick in cold weather, and he'd nearly faceplanted off the Chrysler Building in February. The math kept snagging on the same variable. He scratched notes in the margin of the brief until the conductor gave him a look. Little Winging Station was exactly as advertised. Small, neat, slightly self-satisfied in the way of places that had decided long ago that nothing interesting would ever happen here and were quietly proud of it. Peter slung his camera bag, pocketed his map, and started walking. He'd planned his route the previous evening, a loop through the residential streets, looking for the kind of shot that captured something true about a place. Not the prettiest angle, the truest one. It was what made Peter good at his job, what Jameson would never admit out loud. Peter didn't photograph what things looked like. He photographed what they meant. Privet Drive was on his list. It was the most relentlessly average street he'd ever seen in his life. Every lawn was the same length. Every car was washed. Every curtain twitched as he walked past, because a young man with a camera was the most suspicious thing to happen here since someone had parked on the wrong side of the road in 2003. Peter kept his pace easy, raised his camera occasionally, framed a shot of a rosebush that was so aggressively trimmed it looked almost aggressive in its own right. He was framing a shot of number 6's satellite dish. There was something darkly funny about it, the way it jutted out from the perfect facade when his head tilted. Not a conscious thing, a Spider-Man thing. The sense was quiet, just a low hum at the base of his skull, the kind that didn't mean danger so much as it meant wrong, like a note played slightly flat. He'd learned in years of wearing the suit to pay attention to the distinction. He lowered his camera. Number 4 was directly to his left. A perfectly normal house. More perfectly normal than any of the others, actually, which was its own kind of tell, like someone had tried so hard to look like they had nothing to hide that the effort had become visible. The lawn was immaculate. The car on the drive was freshly washed, a large and aggressively respectable model. The curtains in the front windows were closed despite it being 11 in the morning on a clear enough day. Peter stood on the pavement and listened. The street had the particular quality of silence that comes from everyone being inside, the faint bleed of a television from number 8, a washing machine spinning somewhere further down, birdsong, wind in the hedgerows. Ordinary background noise, and then very faintly from the direction of number 4, a sound that didn't belong, crying, not loud, the kind of crying that had learned to be quiet. Peter stood very still for 3 full seconds. Then he walked up the front path of number 4, Privet Drive, and knocked on the door. The woman who answered was not what he'd expected, though he wasn't sure what he'd expected. She was thin in a way that looked deliberate and uncomfortable, with a long neck and a sharp face and eyes that catalogued him in about half a second and found him wanting. Behind her in the hallway there was a boy, large, pink, somewhere around 8 or 9, who was eating a biscuit and staring. "Can I help you?" the woman said. Her tone suggested she very much doubted this. "Good morning," Peter said, smiling his most harmless smile. "My name's Peter Parker. I'm a photographer working on a piece for. We don't speak to journalists." "Right, no, I completely understand that. I was wondering, actually, I thought I heard." He tilted his head slightly, And yes, there it was again, behind the woman, somewhere under more actions continue / next chapter chapter 2. The spider and the wizard. The first rule Peter established was documentation. The second rule was honesty. The third, and Harry took longest to understand this one, was that nothing Harry could do would make Peter send him back. He made this explicit once, early on, after an incident involving Harry's frustration with a long division worksheet and the subsequent spontaneous combustion of said worksheet. Harry had gone very still in the way he did when he was bracing for consequences, shoulders pulled in, chin down, the physical vocabulary of someone who had learned that shrinking made the impact smaller. Peter had looked at the ash on the kitchen table, then at Harry. Then he'd gotten up, found a fresh worksheet and said, "Okay, let's talk about what happened." Not the worksheet, the division. Where did you get stuck? Harry had stared at him for a full 5 seconds. Then he'd pointed at the long division step he didn't understand and they'd worked through it, and Peter had quietly noted in the composition notebook, strong emotional response to academic frustration. Possible link between emotional state and heat-based output. Follow up. That was October. By December, they had 4 notebooks. The magic, as they came to understand it, and Peter approached it the same way he approached everything, which was to say systematically and with genuine delight at the complexity, was not random. It had triggers, patterns, tendencies. It responded to emotion, yes, but Harry's control over it improved dramatically when he stopped fighting the emotion and started understanding it. When Harry was curious, objects floated. When he was angry, things got warm. When he was frightened, lights blew. When he was happy, genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy, which in the early months was rare enough that they could track the instances specifically, small things bloomed. A houseplant flowering in November. A crack in the kitchen tile that smoothed itself over while Harry was laughing at something on television. It's responsive, Peter said one evening, going over their notes spread across the kitchen floor. It's not just tied to you biologically, it's reactive, like it's listening. To what? To what you need or want on some level. Peter tapped his pen on a notebook page, which means the control mechanism isn't suppression, it's clarity. If you know what you want, it can execute it cleanly. When you're confused or scared, it just does its best interpretation. Harry was sitting cross-legged across from him, turning a pen in his fingers with an absent-minded dexterity that had been developing for weeks. Like a search engine with bad inputs. Peter pointed at him. Exactly like that. So I need to be better at inputs. I think so, yeah. Peter leaned back against the couch. Meditation might help, or focus exercises. The principle is the same. You need to be able to hold a clear intention and release it cleanly without all the static. Harry considered this with the focused seriousness he brought to every new piece of information. Can we design an exercise? Already started, Peter said, showing him the next page of the notebook, where he'd begun sketching a framework. Harry took the notebook and read it. Then, without looking up, he said, "How do you know so much about controlling things your body does when you're scared?" Peter was quiet for a moment. Harry looked up. "Practice," Peter said. "A lot of practice. And someone who taught me." He tapped his wrist, a gesture that had become habitual, a touch to the spot where the shooter sat under his sleeve. "You get better, I promise." Harry nodded, looking back at the notebook. "Okay," he said simply. That was Harry. He asked the question, got the honest answer, and moved forward. He didn't push. He'd learned somehow that some doors were left for people to open on their own. Peter thought, this kid is going to be something else. He thought this probably 15 times a day. January was focus exercises. February was endurance. Peter started Harry on a physical training routine, nothing extreme, appropriate for a 7-year-old but consistent. Morning runs, bodyweight exercises. Balance work on the fire escape that their downstairs neighbor Mrs. Alvarez watched with an expression that mixed concern with reluctant admiration. Harry was small for his age and had spent 6 years being essentially malnourished, but he was wiry and quick and had the kind of focused stubbornness that turned out to be more useful than raw strength over time. Why do I need to be strong? Harry asked one morning, halfway through a set of push-ups that he'd started calling the morning punishment with fond sarcasm. If I can do magic. Peter was doing his own set nearby, which Harry had once watched and said that's not a normal number about, because Harry noticed everything. Because magic is a tool, Peter said, same as anything else. And if the tool fails or it's the wrong tool for the job or something gets between you and using it, you need to be able to handle yourself. Has that happened to you? A tool failing? Peter looked at his web shooters on the counter. He thought about the time the cartridge had run dry over the East River. Yeah, he said, once or twice. What did you do? Improvised. He looked at Harry. Which is why you know how to improvise. Harry went back to his push-ups. "I want to see you do something," he said to the floor. "What kind of something? You know what kind?" Peter paused. He set down his hands and looked at Harry, who had stopped and was looking back at him with those green eyes, steady and completely serious. They'd been dancing around this for months. Peter kept waiting for the right moment, and Harry kept being patient about it in the specifically pointed way of someone who knew exactly what they were waiting for. Peter stood up. He walked to the window and opened it. Cold February air came in. He looked out at the alley behind the building, checked it was empty. Then he stepped out onto the fire escape, and Harry crowded behind him to watch, and Peter put one hand on the railing and went straight up the side of the building to the roof without using the stairs. He heard Harry's sharp intake of breath below him. On the roof, he turned and looked down. Harry was leaning out over the fire escape railing, craning his neck, glasses slightly askew, mouth open. Peter dropped back down, landing on the fire escape without sound. "You're Spider-Man," Harry said. "Yeah." A pause. "How long?" "Since I was 15. Harry absorbed this. His expression was working through several things simultaneously: surprise, and the reorganization of every data point he'd collected over the past months, and something that was rapidly becoming excitement. "That's why you heard me," he said. "In the cupboard, normal people wouldn't have heard me." "No," Peter said, "probably not. And that's why you knew about controlling things your body does when you're scared." Harry's mind was clearly running at full speed. "And why you know about training and focus and right," he exhaled. "Right, okay." He looked at Peter with an expression that was completely new, something open and lit up and almost fierce. "Can you teach me everything? Not just the magic, the other stuff too, the way you move and think, and..." "That's the plan," Peter said. "Yeah, when do we start?" Peter looked at this 7-year-old boy on the fire escape in the February cold, vibrating with something that was equal parts hunger and joy, and thought, "We started a long time ago, actually." "Now, if you want," Harry wanted. The spring and summer of that year established the rhythm that would define the next 4 years of both their lives. Mornings were physical, running, climbing, balance and coordination work, and eventually, carefully, the beginning of actual tumbling and acrobatics, because Harry's magic made him slightly more physically resilient than he should have been, and they discovered this accidentally when he'd fallen off the fire escape during a focus exercise, dropped 15 feet, and landed in a way that should have broken his ankle and didn't. Peter had been 5 stories above him and almost had a heart attack. Harry had looked at his perfectly fine ankle with great scientific interest. "Interesting," Harry had said. "Don't ever do that again," Peter had said, from directly beside him, having crossed the distance in a way that defied physics. "I didn't do it on purpose. I know, still." The afternoons were science and math and what Peter called critical thinking, but Harry called arguing about problems, which was more accurate. Peter had pulled him from the local primary school after the first year. The curriculum wasn't keeping pace, and Harry had started getting that glazed look during lessons that meant his brain had gone somewhere else, which Peter knew from personal experience led nowhere good. He was enrolled in a gifted program 2 days a week and otherwise educated at the kitchen table, which was less chaotic than it sounded because Harry had turned out to be rigorous about his own learning in a way that made Peter slightly self-conscious about his own casual approach. "You should finish your thesis," Harry said once, aged 8, looking at the unfinished paper Peter kept in the drawer he thought Harry didn't know about. "How do you know about that?" "I read your notes." Peter stared at him. "Those were in the drawer. You left the drawer open." Harry looked entirely innocent. "The tensile strength calculation on page 12 is wrong. The variable you're controlling for changes under cold conditions, which means the model doesn't account for, Harry, for temperature variance in the elastic coefficient, which is a significant oversight if you're planning to actually..." "Harry, what? You're 8. Harry blinked. "Is that relevant to the calculation?" Peter stared at him for another moment. Then he pulled out the thesis notes, sat down and said, "Show me." Harry showed him. He was right. The evenings when Peter wasn't working belonged to what Harry called spider training, which had evolved over 2 years from basic physical conditioning into something considerably more specific. Peter had started teaching him wall climbing, not the web slinging, that required the shooters, and Harry's hands were still too small for the configuration, but the actual adhesion principle was something he'd been quietly testing against Harry's magic. They discovered through methodical experimentation that Harry could replicate a version of it, not the same mechanism, not biological, but magic informed by the principle, Harry willing the contact to hold. He could climb a wall for about 45 seconds before his concentration frayed and he slid back down, but 45 seconds became a minute, became 2, became, by the summer he was 8, an indefinite period so long as he kept his focus clean. He fell a lot in the learning process. The magic caught him most of the time. The other times, Peter caught him. Harry started approaching the falling and getting caught as simply part of the process, which Peter thought was one of the most important things he'd learned. "You're not going to let me actually get hurt," Harry said once mid-fall, looking up at Peter with a calm that was either trust or fatalism, and Peter chose to read it as trust. "Correct," Peter said, catching him one-handed. "So the only variable is whether I pull it off," Harry said, already thinking about the next attempt. "Good, that's simpler." At 9, Harry's magic had reached a level of consistent control that Peter privately found astonishing and publicly found useful. He could move objects with precision. He could produce light, extinguish it. He could, with effort, affect temperature in a small radius, not dramatically, not fireball level, but enough to be notable. He could, most consistently and most naturally, do things that benefited other people, which Peter had a theory about but kept to himself. He could also, occasionally, read a room in a way that went beyond normal social perception, a kind of sensitivity to emotional atmospheres that manifested as useful intuition. He'd known twice, when Peter was hurt before Peter had said anything. He'd known once that the bodega on their corner was going to be robbed, an hour before it happened, and told Peter with a casualness that had sent Peter out the door in the suit before Harry had finished the sentence. "How did you know?" Peter had asked afterward. Harry had thought about it. "Felt wrong," he said. "The air felt tight. That's not a scientific description." "I know." Harry was unbothered. "I'll work on quantifying it." He had spent 2 years watching Peter find the rigorous framework inside every chaotic thing and had absorbed the methodology completely. He applied it to his own experience with the dedication of someone building a map of unmapped territory. It was a Thursday in November, Harry 9 years old, when Peter finally took him web-slinging properly. He'd been building up to it, modified grips on a custom shooter configured for Harry's smaller hands, 3 months of testing the mechanism, one very long conversation about physics and failure modes and what to do if the web didn't catch, which Harry had listened to with focused patience and then said, "Okay, and when it does catch, what do I do with my body?" "Lean into the arc," Peter had said. "Don't fight the momentum, use it." "Lean into the arc," Harry repeated, like he was filing it under something important. They went out at 2 in the morning on a Thursday, because Queens was quieter at 2 in the morning and less likely to produce witnesses, and they went to the industrial stretch near the waterfront where the buildings were close together and the alleys were long. Peter went first, arcing out into the dark, and Harry watched from the roof with his arms folded and his glasses slightly fogged from the cold. Then Peter landed back on the roof and handed him the shooter. Harry put it on. He looked at the gap between the buildings. He looked at his hand. "What are you thinking?" Peter asked. "I'm thinking about the arc," Harry said, "and I'm thinking I want to." "That's enough," Peter said. "Go." Harry went. He shot the web. It caught, clean and solid, exactly where he'd aimed, and then he was moving, swinging out over the alley in a long arc, and Peter heard the sound he made, which was not a scream and not a laugh but something between them, something pure and unguarded and completely new, the sound of a person discovering for the first time what their body can do when it isn't afraid. He didn't nail the landing. He hit the far wall at an angle, scrambled for a moment, and ended up clinging to the brickwork upside down by virtue of his wall-climbing instinct kicking in before his brain caught up. He hung there for a second. Then he turned his head and looked back at Peter across the alley. Even from 30 feet away, even in the dark, Peter could see his face. Lit up, completely, unguardedly lit up, the way a kid's face looks when they've discovered something that will belong to them for the rest of their life. Again, Harry called across. "Yeah," Peter said. Again, they were out until 4 in the morning. Harry made 9 passes. He nailed the landing on the 6th. On the 9th, he added a rotation he hadn't been taught, caught the web at the apex, and came down on the fire escape of a building 2 blocks over standing upright. And when Peter landed next to him, he looked over and said, "I adjusted the release angle by about 15 degrees, and it changed the arc profile significantly. I want to run the numbers tomorrow." Peter looked at him. "You added a rotation. It felt right." "You added a rotation you'd never practiced in the dark over a 40-foot drop, and you're talking to me about the arc profile." Harry considered. "Was that not okay?" "It was very okay," Peter said after a moment. "You just can't do that to me without warning." Harry grinned. It was one of his real grins, the ones that appeared less frequently than they should, but when they did transformed his entire face. "Sorry," he said, not sounding sorry at all. Peter ruffled his hair, which Harry tolerated with the dignity of someone enduring a minor indignity from someone they were fond of. "Come on," he said. "School in the morning. It's already morning. Formal morning." They swung home across the dark Queen's skyline, 2 figures moving through the gaps between buildings and the amber light of the city, and Harry got better with every arc. and Peter watched him and felt the particular complicated pride of someone who has taught a thing that has already gone beyond what they taught. The year Harry turned 10 was the year the training got serious in a new way, not because Peter decided it, because Harry did. He came to Peter one Sunday morning with a notebook, not one of the magic experiment notebooks, a new one, where he'd written, in his precise and slightly too adult handwriting, a proposed training framework for the next 12 months. Oles benchmarks weekly structure. He'd accounted for school time, for Peter's work schedule, and for what he called operational readiness, which Peter had to read twice before he understood that Harry meant being actually useful in a real situation, not just in practice. Operational readiness, Peter said. I want to be good enough to help, Harry said. Actually help, not just know how things work, be able to do something when it matters. Peter looked at the notebook. You're 10. Almost 11, Harry said, and you started at 15, so I'm catching up. I got bitten by a radioactive spider. That's different from. I know your origin story, Harry said, with the patience of someone who had heard a caveat many times. I'm not asking to be Spider-Man. I'm asking you to take me seriously. Peter looked at him, this thin, green-eyed, completely certain 10-year-old across the kitchen table, and thought about a 6-year-old in a cupboard who had asked, "Are you going to send me back?" and had already made peace with yes. Okay, Peter said, let's look at the framework. They spent an hour going through it. Peter made adjustments, pushed some benchmarks back, changed the sequence of certain skill elements, added things Harry hadn't thought of. Harry argued with 3 of his changes, conceded on 2, and dug in on the 3rd with such specific and well-reasoned pushback that Peter eventually conceded that one back. They compromised on the timeline. By the end of the year, Harry could climb any surface for as long as he needed. He could swing at speed and land with precision. He could throw a punch that meant something and take one and keep moving. His magic was sharp and responsive, not perfect. There were still rough edges, but the architecture of it was solid. He could move objects at range with precision, produce barriers of hardened air when he needed them, affect light and temperature deliberately. He'd been developing what Peter had started calling his read, the sensitivity to rooms and situations, into something deliberate, a conscious scanning rather than a passive reception. And he'd been studying, not just magic, not just physics and chemistry and mathematics and the things that came naturally. He'd been studying strategy. He'd read everything Peter had on movement and space and tactical positioning, half of which he'd found on Peter's bookshelf, and the other half he'd sourced himself from the library. He'd watched footage. He'd asked questions that sometimes made Peter realize he should probably be asking them himself. You're building towards something, Peter said one evening, watching Harry work through a training sequence on the roof, precise and efficient and completely focused. Harry said, not stopping. What? Harry came out of the sequence and looked at Peter. I want to be someone that problems bounce off, he said. Not because I'm untouchable, because I'm ready. Peter looked at him for a long moment. Okay, he said. Okay, Harry said and went back to the sequence. On the night before Harry's 11th birthday, they sat on the roof of the apartment building with takeaway containers between them and watched the city do what it did, the lights, the noise, the restless living energy of a place that never entirely slept. Harry had Chinese food. Peter had a burrito because there was a new place 2 blocks over and he was in a committed relationship with their salsa. What do you think next year looks like? Harry asked. He was doing the thing where he turned a chopstick end over end in his fingers without looking at it, a habit he'd developed over 3 years of the same unconscious dexterity that Peter recognized from his own hands. Not sure yet, Peter said, but I think it's going to be interesting. The magic stuff is going to become more visible, Harry said. I can feel it, like it's been contained and it's starting to push against the edges. He paused. I don't know how to explain it better than that. No, that makes sense, Peter said. Because it did, he'd been noticing it too, the way Harry's ambient magical field had intensified over the past year, small things happening at the edges of his awareness that Harry sometimes didn't even notice. We'll deal with it. What if there are other people like me? Harry said. Magic people. Peter ate a bite of his burrito and thought about whether to say anything. He'd been following threads quietly for 4 years, scraps of information, odd encounters, the time he'd tailed a woman in a pointed hat down a Manhattan side street on a hunch and lost her in what appeared to be a brick wall. I think there probably are, he said, and they might want to find you. Yeah, Harry said without concern. That's fine. It might be complicated. Most things are. Harry looked out at the city. But I'll have you. He said it factually, the way he said most true things, no performance in it, and I'll be ready. Peter thought about a woman on a broom on 34th Street that he'd photographed on a whim and never published. He thought about a letter he'd half expected to arrive for the past year. He thought about a world he didn't understand, containing forces that had already shaped Harry's life before Harry had a name for them, and he thought about what it would mean when that world came looking. "Yeah," he said, "you will be." Above them in the August night, the stars did what stars do, burned steadily, completely indifferent to the plans of the world below, reliable in that specific way of things that have been there long before you and will remain long after. Harry finished his noodles. Peter finished his burrito. They sat on the roof until the city quieted slightly around midnight, and then went inside, and Harry was asleep in 10 minutes with the easy confidence of someone who is exactly where they're supposed to be. The owl arrived the next morning. It came through the window Harry had left open for the cross breeze, a large tawny thing with enormous amber eyes that looked around the kitchen with the air of a delivery driver who had seen worse addresses. It landed on the kitchen table, stuck out its leg with the letter attached, and looked at Harry with great professional expectation. Harry looked back. He looked at Peter, who was pouring coffee and had gone very still. "Did you know about this?" Harry said. "I suspected something was coming," Peter said carefully. Harry looked at the letter, then at the owl. "You can let go," he told it. "I've got it." The owl released the letter and immediately helped itself to the remains of Harry's cereal, which Harry allowed because it seemed like the reasonable thing to do. The envelope was thick, yellowish, and addressed in green ink. Mr. H. Potter, the roof access apartment, building address, Queens, New York, NY. Which meant whoever had sent it knew not just where Harry lived, but where Harry was, which was the roof access apartment specifically, because that was where Harry spent most of his time. Harry turned it over. There was a wax seal on the back, a crest with a lion and a snake and an eagle and a badger, and the words Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in a curve beneath them. "Witchcraft and Wizardry," Harry read. "Yeah," Peter said. Harry looked at him. "I've been doing research," Peter said. "There's a magical world. Schools, institutions, a whole parallel society. I've been trying to get a handle on it for a couple of years. Haven't been able to get deep enough in to understand the full picture, but you knew I was magic. I knew you were magic. I didn't know the exact shape of it." Peter put his coffee down and came to the table. "Open it." Harry opened it. The letter inside was written in the same green ink, formal and precise. A letter of acceptance to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, with a list of required materials, instructions regarding the purchase thereof, and directions to Diagon Alley, London, via the Leaky Cauldron public house. Harry read it twice. Then he set it on the table and looked at it. "What do you think?" Peter said. "I think," Harry said slowly, "that they've known about me for a long time." He tapped the letter. "This is formal. This isn't someone who just found me. This is an institution that has me on a list." "Yeah," Peter said, "that's what I think too. Which means someone chose to leave me with the Dursleys." Harry's voice was very even, not angry. That would come later maybe when he was alone and let himself feel it. Right now he was analytical. "Someone made a decision about where I went. I don't know who," Peter said, "or why, but yeah, that's what it looks like." Harry nodded slowly. Then he picked up the letter again and read the materials list. He had the expression he got when he was absorbing new information and reorganizing everything around it. "We'll need to go to London," he said. "Diagon Alley. And I should probably visit Gringotts if the wizarding world has banks, because if my parents had money, and if this is as established a society as it seems to be, then there's probably an account." "Already booked the flights," Peter said. Harry looked at him. "When?" "Last week. I figured the letter was coming." Harry held the letter in both hands and looked at Peter, and something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, something more complicated, the expression of someone who keeps being surprised by the fact that they are not alone. "You booked flights, round trip. We've got 2 weeks. Peter sat down. "I figure we go to London, sort out Gringotts and the school supplies, and take the time to learn as much as we can about what we're walking Harry Potter into, because I want to understand this world before it gets its hands on you." "It can try," Harry said, and there was nothing in his voice that was afraid of this, only a quiet, grounded readiness, the product of 5 years of mornings and notebooks and midnight web swings and a kitchen table full of takeaway containers and long division, and the kind of learning that happens when someone believes you're worth teaching. "I'm ready." Peter looked at the owl, which had finished the cereal and was now eyeing the fruit bowl. "You staying?" he asked it. The owl blinked at him with great dignity. "Right," Peter said. "Don't eat the bananas." He pulled out his own notebook, an old one, near full of web equations and training notes and half-finished thoughts, and flipped to a clean page. At the top he wrote, "Hogwarts Prep." Below it, in his quick, practical shorthand, 1. Gringotts. 2. Diagon Alley supplies. 3. Research. 4. What does Harry need to know that they won't teach him? He slid the notebook across the table. Harry read the list, picked up a pen, and added a fifth item. 5. Find out who left me with the Dursleys. And why. He wrote it without emphasis, without drama, just a line on a list. Just a thing to be answered. But Peter read it and he understood. Whatever Hogwarts was, whatever the wizarding world was, whatever it thought Harry Potter was going to be when it finally got hold of him, it was going to have to account for 5 years of queens and rooftops, and a notebook full of magic experiments, and a boy who had been taught that problems were for solving and falling was just part of the process, and running from anything was never, under any circumstances, the plan. It was going to get something it hadn't bargained for. Peter was quietly very much looking forward to it. Chapter 3. The Letter and the Alley. The leaky cauldron smelled like wood smoke, old beer, and something that might have been magical in origin or might have been the drains. Harry couldn't tell yet. He filed the ambiguity under investigate later and kept moving, because Peter had a look on his face that meant he was absorbing everything, and Harry knew better than to interrupt that process. The pub was dim and crowded in a way that felt deliberate, like the shadows were load-bearing, structural, part of what kept the place from being visible to the wrong kind of eyes. The patrons were extraordinary. A woman in the corner had a hat with a live plant growing out of the brim. 2 men at the bar were playing cards that kept rearranging themselves. An elderly wizard near the fireplace was reading a newspaper whose photographs were moving, the people in them gesticulating silently behind the newsprint. Harry looked at everything. He didn't stare, because Peter had spent years teaching him the difference between observing and gaping, and because something in him was too busy cataloging to spare the energy for gaping. A small, hunched man behind the bar, Tom, his name turned out to be, looked up when they walked in and went absolutely still for a second before saying, with great care, "Can I help you? We're looking for access to Diagon Alley," Peter said. Friendly, easy, the particular tone he used when he wanted to be underestimated. Tom's eyes moved to Harry, to the scar on his forehead, which Harry's hair sometimes covered and sometimes didn't, and currently didn't. Something moved across Tom's face, recognition, a complicated feeling about that recognition, and a rapid recalibration. "Of course," Tom said. "Right through the back, sir. And welcome, Mr. Potter." Harry nodded. He didn't say, "How do you know my name?" because that was obvious. And he didn't say thank you in the overly warm way that he suspected people expected, because he was still working out the shape of what this world thought he was. He said thanks and followed Tom through the pub. The back courtyard was a small, damp, entirely unremarkable brick wall. Tom produced a wand, Harry's first sight of one outside of Peter's research photographs, and tapped a sequence of bricks with precise, practiced movements. The wall shivered. It contracted inward, bricks folding back on themselves with a sound like shuffling cards, and opened into an archway, and through the archway was Diagon Alley. Peter let out a low breath beside him. Harry understood it completely. The alley was long and crooked and packed and loud, a living market of things Harry had no reference for, stacked and hung and displayed in shop windows that flickered with light that didn't come from any bulb. An apothecary with barrels of things that moved outside its door. A broom shop with a sleek racing model in the window that Harry clocked as aerodynamically significant. Owls in cages stacked 3 high outside a creature shop, one of which locked eyes with Harry and held his gaze for an unsettling amount of time. Robes, cauldrons, books, telescopes, things with no name Harry could apply to them. "Okay," Peter murmured. "Gringotts first." Gringotts was at the end of the alley, a white marble building that put everything around it firmly in its place. Enormous and slightly imperious, with goblins at every door, and desks who managed to look simultaneously bored and absolutely in charge. Harry had read about goblins in the research Peter had accumulated, a species with their own history, their own grievances, their own economy, operating within the wizarding world on terms that had been renegotiated through violence several times over. He had also read that they had long memories. The goblin at the front desk had a nameplate that said Aragian OK. He was doing something with ledgers when they approached. He didn't look up. "Harry Potter," Harry said. "I believe there's an account in my name." Ragnock looked up. The look he gave Harry was the same 3-stage process Tom had gone through: recognition, recalibration, assessment, but where Tom's had resolved into deference, Ragnock's resolved into something more neutral and considerably more interesting. He was being evaluated. Harry was fine with that. "Key," Ragnock said. "I don't have one," Harry said. "I wasn't given one. I was placed with non-magical relatives at age 1, and there was no transfer of documents." He said it straightforwardly, no complaint in it, just fact. "Is there a verification process I can use instead?" Ragnock's expression shifted in a very small way that Harry thought might be approval. "Blood verification," he said. A formality, given the scar, but we do things properly here. Good, Harry said. So do I. Peter, standing slightly behind Harry's shoulder, said nothing. This was also something he'd taught, by modeling it. Sometimes the best support is the kind that stays quiet and lets someone do their own work. The blood verification was quick and clinical, a small silver dish, a pinprick, and then a brief, vivid flare of gold that made the surrounding goblins look up from their work. Ragnarok looked at the result in the dish with an expression that had moved past neutral into something Harry couldn't read yet. The Potter Vault, Ragnarok said, and 2 subsidiary accounts. He paused. There is also a trust vault, established for your educational expenses with a separate key which should have been delivered at age 11, and a second account, the access to which is contested. Contested by whom? Peter said. Ragnarok looked at him. By the executor of the estate, he said. Albus Dumbledore, silence. Harry looked at Peter. Peter looked at Harry. Something was communicated between them without words, the shorthand of 5 years of shared space. They would come back to this, they would pull on this thread, they would not make a scene about it here because this was not the place and not the time and they had not yet established what they were dealing with. I'd like to see the full accounting, Harry said. Everything, the trust vault, the main vault, the contested account, whatever you can show me legally. I can show you the trust vault today, Ragnarok said. The full accounting will require a formal appointment, as there are complexities. I'd like to make that appointment, Harry said, for this week if possible. Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. Harry looked back, easy and direct. He had learned from Peter that you didn't fill silences that belonged to someone else. Wednesday, Ragnarok said, 9 in the morning. He wrote something in his ledger. You're more organized than I expected, Mr. Potter. I've had a good teacher, Harry said. The cart ride to the vault was extraordinary. Peter gripped the side with the controlled stillness of someone experiencing something intensely while refusing to show it. Harry leaned into the wind and watched the walls flash past and thought about the vault waiting at the bottom, which represented things he didn't have feelings about yet. His parents, their money, a life that had existed before the cupboard that he had no memory of and only one bent photograph as evidence of. He kept those feelings filed under process later and let the cart ride be what it was, which was genuinely thrilling. The vault was not the largest room he'd ever been in, but the gold inside it, stacked in heavy coins that caught the torchlight and threw it back warm and copper orange, was more than he'd expected, and underneath the gold, on a small shelf to the right of the door, was a sealed envelope with his name on it, in handwriting that was not his aunt's, his mother's handwriting. He didn't know that yet, but he would later, and he'd remember this moment, standing in the vault at 11 years old, picking up the letter with a specific and permanent clarity. He put it in his inside jacket pocket without opening it. Now was not the time. He took what he needed from the trust vault for school supplies, counted it precisely, and thanked Ragnarok. On the way out of the bank, Peter said quietly, "You okay?" "Fine," Harry said. Then, because that was too flat, "It's a lot, but fine." He straightened his jacket. "Supplies next, I want to see the bookshop." Flourish and blots was everything Harry had expected a wizarding bookshop to be, which was to say it was magnificent and slightly dangerous. Books stacked on shelves that extended past sensible height, a rolling ladder, some volumes that were chained to their shelves, and one that was growling softly in a case near the back. Harry went through the school list with methodical focus, pulling each required text, but he also collected 6 others: books on the theory of magic, on advanced charms work, on the history of the wizarding world, on magical creatures, which he stacked on the counter and purchased without ceremony. The shopkeeper looked at the stack. "First year," he said, with the tone of someone who had made an error in categorizing him. "Yes," Harry said. "Most first years just get the list." "I know," Harry said. "That's fine for most first years." Peter was looking at the History of Magic volume with an expression of genuine intellectual pleasure that Harry recognized as the prelude to an hour of questions. He tapped Peter's arm. "Focus." "I'm focused," Peter said. "I can focus and read the chapter headings simultaneously. You can buy it, but we have 6 more shops." Peter bought it. Madame Malkin's was less interesting intellectually and more interesting sociologically, which Harry catalogued with attention. He was in the middle of being measured for robes, arms out, the tape measure doing its enchanted circuit of his dimensions with a focus that bordered on intrusive, when the door opened and another student came in. He was pale, blonde, precisely turned out in a way that looked like it had required effort, and someone else's effort specifically. He took the stool beside Harry with the ease of someone who was accustomed to space being available for them, and said to Madame Malkin, "Hogwarts, first year," with the intonation of a sentence that had never in its life expected to be questioned. Then he looked at Harry. His eyes did the same 3-stage process Harry had been clocking all morning: recognition, assessment. But his recalibration was different from Tom's and different from Ragnar's. There was something happening behind his eyes that was more complex. Hogwarts too, he said casually. Yes, Harry said. First year. Yes. The blonde boy seemed to do a calculation. I'm Draco Malfoy, he said in the tone of someone announcing information that should produce a response. Harry looked at him for a moment. The name meant nothing to him yet. He hadn't gotten deep enough into wizarding social structure to know the family, but the tone told him several things, and those things were data. Harry Potter, he said. The silence that followed was a different shape than the ones before. Draco Malfoy looked at him with an expression that was recalibrating considerably faster than the others had, and something in it was, not uncomfortable exactly, but thrown. Harry suspected he'd been preparing for this meeting. He suspected the version he'd been preparing for was quite different from Harry. I've heard about you, Draco said carefully. Probably, Harry said. Do you know about the wizarding world? Were you raised? I know enough, Harry said. I've been doing research. Research, Draco repeated, with a very slight emphasis that Harry read as him recalibrating again. Harry returned his attention to Madame Malkin, who was measuring his inseam. What house do you think you'll be in? Slytherin, Draco said. All my family have been. What does that mean to you? Harry said, not a challenge, genuinely curious. Draco blinked. Clearly this was not a question he'd anticipated. It means legacy, ambition, it matters. Sure, Harry said, legacy matters. What else? Another blink. What do you mean, what else? You said legacy and ambition. I wondered if there was something else. Something that's yours specifically, not just the family line. Draco stared at him. Harry looked at him with polite attention, waiting. I want to be good at magic, Draco said after a moment. It came out slightly flat, like something that had been said without its surrounding architecture, the performance stripped away to reach the actual content. He seemed to register this and reached for the performance again, but it settled differently. My father expects, sure, Harry said again. That's a different thing though, isn't it? What your father expects and what you want. Draco Malfoy had the expression of someone who had walked into a conversation expecting to lead it, and had found himself following in a direction he hadn't anticipated, and was not entirely sure whether he objected. He looked at Harry and Harry looked back, and what passed between them was not friendship, not yet, maybe not for a long time, but something honest. A first meeting of actual people rather than the meeting of the famous orphan and the heir of the family line. You're not what I expected, Draco said. What did you expect? A pause. Something easier to categorize. Harry almost smiled. Sorry to disappoint. I didn't say I was disappointed, Draco said, and he said it with a precision that Harry thought was probably as close to genuine as he was capable of being in a first encounter. Madame Malkin announced Harry was done, and he stepped off the stool. He looked at Draco once more. See you at school, he said. Yes, Draco said, and then, working it out as he said it, I suppose you will. Peter was waiting outside with the bags and a look that said he'd been listening through the window, which Harry had absolutely known he would be and had completely accounted for. Interesting, Peter said. Very, Harry agreed. Smart, trained, performing something he's been told to perform rather than something he actually is, potentially useful, or potentially a problem. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Harry reached for one of the bags. Ollivander's next. Ollivander's was different from everything else. The shop was narrow and quiet, the walls lined with boxes from floor to ceiling, dust motes moving in light that didn't come from any obvious source. The man behind the counter was old in the way of things that have always been old, pale, silver-eyed, with an attention that felt physical, like being leaned on. Mr. Potter, Ollivander said before Harry had spoken. I wondered when you'd come. He looked at Harry's forehead, briefly, then at his hands. I remember every wand I've sold, Mr. Potter. I remember your parents' wands very well. Holly and Phoenix Feather, 11 inches, your mother. Mahogany and Phoenix Feather, 11 inches, your father. He paused. I also remember the wand that gave you that scar. You and Phoenix Feather, 13.5 inches. His silver eyes were very still. And the curious thing, Mr. Potter, the curious thing is that the phoenix who gave the feather for that wand gave only one other. And that feather is in my wand, Harry said. Ollivander stopped. I've read about the connection, Harry said. I know about the shared core. I'd like to understand the implications better, but that's secondary. What I need right now is a wand that works. Ollivander looked at him for a long moment. You are not what I expected, he said. I've been hearing that a lot today, Harry said. Ollivander measured him, wingspan, wand hand, the distance between elbow and wrist, and began producing boxes. The first 4 did nothing. The 5th produced a shower of sparks that Ollivander looked at disapprovingly. The 6th snapped itself in half, which seemed to surprise even Ollivander. The seventh, 11 inches, holly wood, phoenix feather produced something that wasn't sparks. It produced a warmth that moved up Harry's arm and settled in his chest like a key turning in a lock that had always been there. And then, because Harry was Harry and had spent 5 years learning to treat his body's signals as data, he noticed something else, a secondary resonance. A pull like a compass needle toward something in the back of the shop. He tracked it, found the direction. "There's something back there," Harry said, "to the left about 12 feet. Ollivander had gone completely still. "I can feel it pulling," Harry said. "Is that normal?" "No," Ollivander said. "No, that is not normal." He went to the back of the shop and returned with a box that was thicker with dust than the others. He opened it. "Vine wood," he said quietly. "Dragon heartstring. 10 3/4 inches." He looked at Harry. "This has been here for 23 years. It never found its wizard." He held it out. "Or witch." Harry held the holly wand in his right hand. He took the vine wood wand in his left. Both of them flared simultaneously. The warmth in his right hand doubled. His left hand sang. Peter, who had been standing by the door and saying nothing, made a sound that Harry recognized as him trying not to say interesting out loud for the third time. "2 wands," Harry said. "Highly unusual," Ollivander said. He was looking at Harry with an expression that had moved entirely past commerce into something that was almost reverence, and Harry found that slightly uncomfortable, because reverence was a look he didn't know what to do with. "I've never, in 60 years, is it possible?" Harry said, "practically speaking, using 2 wands. Theoretically, the literature is almost non-existent, a handful of cases historically." Ollivander was clearly working through it in real time, the pleasure of a man confronted with genuine novelty. The 2 cores would need to be compatible, or the wizard would need to be capable of maintaining 2 distinct channels of intent simultaneously, which is a focus problem, Harry said, not an impossibility. "Well, yes, technically. I'll take both," Harry said. He paid for both wands, pocketed them, right hip for the holly, left hip for the vine wood. In the holsters Peter had made him get sewn into the jacket specifically for this trip. Because Peter had said, "I don't know what wand holsters are, but I know you need one 3 weeks ago based purely on intuition," and turned out to be entirely correct. Outside on the alley, they walked back toward the leaky cauldron with the bags and the books and the wands and the weight of the day on them both. "2 wands," Peter said. "Yeah, that's new. Everything about this is new," Harry said. "That's fine. Dumbledore's name on your vault account," Peter said. "The executor of your parents' estate. The person who made the decision about where you went." "Yeah," Harry said again, not angry, working it out. "He'll be at Hogwarts, headmaster." "I know." Peter shifted the book bag to his other shoulder. "I want you to go in there with your eyes open. I don't know what he is. He might be someone who made a decision he thought was right. He might be someone with a plan that you're part of without being asked. I don't know." "Neither do I," Harry said, "so I'll find out." "You're not going to. I'm not going to blow anything up," Harry said patiently. "I'm going to be polite and observant, and I'm going to find out. There's a difference between being afraid of someone and choosing when to move." He looked at Peter. "You taught me that." Peter was quiet for a moment. "I did," he said. "Yeah, there's one more thing I want to do today," Harry said. He'd been thinking about it since the bank, since the vault and the shelf and the envelope he'd put in his inside pocket and hadn't touched since. He knew what it was, and he wanted to read it in the right place, not in the middle of a busy alley, not surrounded by a world that had opinions about who he was. They found a quiet corner of a small cafe on the edge of the alley, mismatched chairs, enchanted teapots. A tabby cat asleep on the windowsill who was giving off a faint shimmer that might have been an aura or might have been the afternoon light. Harry ordered tea he didn't particularly want and put the envelope on the table between them. It was addressed to him in handwriting that was looped and quick and warm. "Harry," it said on the front, just his name. Like the person who wrote it expected to be handing it to him directly and had to settle for this. He opened it. The letter inside was 3 pages. He read it twice without speaking, and Peter sat across from him and drank his tea and looked out the window and gave him the space that the thing required. His mother had written it when he was 3 months old. She'd written it, she said, because she was afraid, and because she was also practical, and because if something happened she wanted him to have this rather than nothing. She'd written about his father, the jokes and the loyalty and the way he laughed, which apparently Harry had inherited. She'd written about herself, what she'd been before all of this, a girl from an ordinary suburb not unlike the one he'd grown up in, who had been told she was extraordinary and had decided to believe it rather than be afraid of it. She'd written about love, the specific and slightly embarrassed shorthand of someone who finds emotional declarations difficult but is trying anyway. She'd written, "You are so loved, Harry. You have always been so loved. Whatever happens, don't let anyone tell you differently." She had written at the very bottom, in slightly smaller letters that suggested she'd almost run out of space, "And if you find this without us, find people worth keeping. Trust your gut." Your gut is brilliant. Harry put the letter down. He folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and put it back in his inside pocket next to the bent photograph. He picked up his tea. "She sounds like she was great," Peter said quietly. "Yeah," Harry said. His voice was steady. His eyes were very bright behind his glasses, which he'd replaced with a better-fitting pair 2 years ago but still adjusted the same habitual way, one push at the bridge when he was managing something. "She was a Muggle-born," Harry said. "First generation, didn't grow up in the wizarding world." He looked at Peter. "Like walking into something you weren't raised in and deciding to be extraordinary at it anyway." "Yeah," Peter said. "Like that." They sat in the quiet for a moment. The tabby cat on the windowsill stretched and resettled. Outside, Diagon Alley continued its noisy, magical, slightly overwhelming life. "I want to go back to Gringotts on Wednesday," Harry said. "Find out everything about the contested account and about Dumbledore's role. Already planning on it. And I want to visit the Ministry of Magic before we leave. I want to understand the governmental structure before I go into a school that operates inside it." Peter raised an eyebrow. "You think they'll let us in?" "I think I'm Harry Potter," Harry said, simply and without vanity. "I think doors are going to open whether I want them to or not. I'd rather walk through them deliberately than have them opened for me." "Fair point." Harry turned his teacup in his hands, looking at it. "I've been thinking about what Ollivander said, about the phoenix that gave the feather for the wand that, for Voldemort's wand." He said the name flatly, not with drama, because he'd noticed that morning that people around them flinched at it, and he didn't think that was useful. "The same phoenix gave mine." "I know," Peter said. "So we're connected," Harry said. "At some level. There's a relationship between us that exists independently of anything either of us chose." He paused. "That sounds like someone else's plan." "It might be. I don't love that," Harry said. But knowing about it is better than not knowing." "Yes," Harry set down his teacup. "And I'm going to deal with what's actually in front of me rather than what might be coming. The school first, the structure, the people." He pulled out the small notebook he carried, always in his back pocket, the current one, number 16 in the series they'd been keeping since he was 7, and opened it to a fresh page. He wrote, "What do I need to know about Hogwarts specifically?" and began a list below it, fast and precise. Peter watched him. He had this face sometimes, Peter did, that Harry had learned to read over 5 years. It was the face that meant "I'm proud of you and I'm not going to make a thing of it," and it had a particular quality of stillness to it that was different from his surveillance stillness or his thinking stillness. Harry was aware of it and chose not to comment on it, because that was also something he'd learned. Some things you let exist without naming them. "Do you want to come to Hogwarts?" Harry said, without looking up from his notebook. "When term starts, could you, if you wanted to?" "I don't think non-magical people can just rock up to a wizarding school." "You're not exactly non-magical in the conventional sense," Harry pointed out. "And you're my guardian. They can't reasonably refuse to let you see the school at minimum." "I'll look into it," Peter said. "I'm not worried," Harry said. "About going, I want you to know that. I'm not worried." "I know," Peter said. "I'm curious," Harry said. "And I'm ready." He looked up. "And I want to find out who I am in that world, not who they think I am, who I actually am." "Yeah," Peter said. "That's the one that matters." Harry looked out the window at the alley, at a world he'd been born into and removed from, and was now returning to on his own terms, with notebooks and 2 wands and 5 years of rooftops, and the letter in his inside pocket telling him his gut was brilliant. He turned back to his notebook. "Right," he said. "Let's make a plan." The Wednesday appointment at Gringotts was 3 hours long, and produced a stack of documents that Harry read on the flight home with the focused attention he'd brought to every important piece of information in his life. Peter read over his shoulder and said things occasionally, and Harry responded or didn't based on whether the thing required a response. The contested account was his parents' full estate, frozen pending what the documentation described as security arrangements of a temporary nature, authorized by Albus Dumbledore as executor in November 1981. It had been frozen for 10 years. It contained not just money but property records, a house in Godric's Hollow which the records indicated had been destroyed, and a second property in Wales that hadn't been. Documents, correspondence, items of personal significance. All of it held in stasis, pending Dumbledore's review. Harry read the relevant clause twice, then he turned to a fresh page in his notebook and wrote, "Why, not angry, not dramatic. Just a word in a notebook, clean and direct, a question that required an answer." He circled it once. 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, with the vine wood wand in his left jacket pocket and the holly one in his right and his parents' letter over his heart. Harry Potter looked at the question and thought, I'll find out. He turned to the next page and started outlining his first month at Hogwarts. Chapter 4. Platform 9 and 3/4. The train left at 11. Harry was on the platform at 10:15, because being early was something Peter had modeled so consistently over 5 years that it had become structural, like good posture. He had one trunk, organized, not packed. There was a difference, and an owl he'd acquired on the last day in London from a shop near the Leaky Cauldron. The owl was small and tawny with enormous eyes, and a personality that Harry had clocked within 10 minutes of meeting it as deeply opinionated. He'd named her Newton, after the scientist, because she had a way of observing everything around her with what looked like rigorous judgment. Peter was beside him with coffee and the expression he got when he was committing something to memory. The platform was chaos in the specific way of a place where a large number of families are all trying to do the same thing simultaneously while being very emotional about it. Trunks everywhere, owls, cats, one extremely unhappy toad in a glass tank being carried by a round-faced boy who looked like he was already apologizing for the toad's existence. Parents in robes, parents in muggle clothes, children in various stages of excitement and terror. The Hogwarts Express sat at the end of the platform in a billow of steam, vivid red, making a sound like something living and very pleased with itself. Harry watched all of it and let it settle into his understanding of the landscape. You've got everything, Peter said. It wasn't a question, but it had a question inside it. Everything, Harry confirmed. Both wands, the notebooks, he'd brought 5 blank for new material. The books, all 19 of them, which had required an undetectable extension charm on his trunk that Harry had executed himself, because he'd been practicing it for 3 weeks specifically for this. His parents' letter and photograph. The Gringotts' documents in a sealed case. His web shooter's modified configuration, 2 spare cartridges. Peter had said this was probably unnecessary, and Harry had said probably wasn't the same as definitely. The Gringotts meeting is scheduled for December, Peter said. Ragnock said he'd have the full analysis of the contested account by then. I'll push if they drag their feet. I know you will. And Matt is looking into the legal angle on the property in Wales, Peter. Harry looked at him. I've got it. Peter stopped. He drank his coffee. He had the look again, the one Harry didn't comment on. Right, he said. Come at Christmas, Harry said. Ragnock's meeting, and I'll have had a term to understand the shape of things. I'll be there. Newton made a sound from her cage that was probably editorial. Harry looked at her. I know, he told her. Does the owl talk? Peter said. Not in English, Harry said, but she has opinions. He picked up Newton's cage and looked at the train. The platform was thinning as people boarded. A family of redheads nearby was involved in an operation of impressive scale. 6 or 7 children, a harassed-looking mother in a green robe, trunks in various sizes. Harry clocked them peripherally and filed them away. I'll write, Harry said. I'll write back, Peter said. And if anything feels wrong, you tell me. Anything that feels wrong, Harry said, I'll handle, and then tell you. Peter gave him a look. Harry gave it back, which was entirely Peter's fault for teaching him to hold eye contact with conviction. Fair enough, Peter said. Go on, you'll miss the train. Harry picked up Newton and his trunk and turned toward the barrier. Then he stopped. He turned back. He didn't say anything. Neither did Peter. They'd gotten very good over 5 years at the conversations that didn't require words. Peter put a hand on his shoulder briefly, and Harry nodded, and that was enough. It was the right amount. He walked through the barrier into the steam and the noise and the red engine, and platform 9 and 3/4 received him, and Harry Potter got on the Hogwarts Express. He found a compartment near the middle of the train that was empty, stowed his trunk, settled Newton's cage on the rack, and sat with his back to the wall, facing the door, sight lines to both ends of the corridor, which was habit so deep it was automatic. He pulled out notebook 16 and went back to his first month Hogwarts outline. He'd been there for approximately 7 minutes when the compartment door opened. The red-headed boy from the platform stood in the doorway, looking slightly hopeful and slightly uncertain about the hope, the way of someone who has been told to go make friends and is finding the mechanics of this harder in practice. He had freckles, a smear of something on his nose, and a rat in his jacket pocket that appeared to be asleep. Everywhere else is full, he said. Can I? Sure, Harry said and meant it. The boy came in, hauled his trunk up, and sat down across from Harry with the immediate ease of someone who defaulted to taking up appropriate space in a room, which Harry found instinctively comfortable. Not aggressive, not shrinking, just present. Ron Weasley, the boy said. Harry Potter. Ron's eyes went to his forehead automatically, then back up, and he did it with the self-consciousness of someone who knew he'd done it and wished he hadn't, which Harry respected. "Sorry," Ron said. "Everyone does that, I expect." "Yeah," Harry said. "It's fine. I've got 6 brothers," Ron said, which seemed to be what came to him as a conversational follow-up, and which Harry found more interesting than a question about the scar would have been. "All older. 5 older, 1 no, all older. Fred and George are twins. They're trouble." He said this with a foundational pride that meant he'd told this story 100 times and still meant it every time. "Bill and Charlie are already done school. Percy's a prefect." The slight deflation on prefect told Harry everything he needed to know about Percy. "And Ginny's my little sister. She's not at school yet." "Big family," Harry said. "Yeah." Ron pulled out a package of sandwiches and then seemed to remember he was in company and hesitated. Harry made a gesture that meant "Don't stop on my account," and Ron ate a sandwich. "Your family," he started and then stopped. "My parents are dead," Harry said. He'd been saying this since he was 6. The shape of it had changed over time, less rote, more real, but he'd also built something around the rawness of it that meant he could say it in company without it incapacitating him. "My guardian's in New York. He's not magical." Ron considered this. "Is that weird, being raised by a non-magical person?" "No," Harry said. "It was good." He thought about it. "Different from what I would have had, probably, but good. He taught you about, Ron waved a hand that encompassed the train, the school, presumably magic in general. "Not the wizarding world specifically. He knew I had magic. We figured out a lot of it together." Harry paused. "He taught me other things." Ron seemed to find this appropriately interesting without pressing it, which Harry liked. The conversation moved naturally. Ron asked about New York with the enthusiasm of someone who had grown up in the Scottish countryside and found cities the stuff of adventure. Harry asked about Quidditch with genuine curiosity, because aerodynamics interested him, and he wanted to understand the physical mechanics of broom flight. Ron lit up at Quidditch in the way of the truly devoted, and spent 12 minutes explaining the positions with his sandwich as a prop, and Harry asked questions that were slightly more technically precise than Ron had expected, and by the time the train was properly out of London, they were in a real conversation rather than an interview. Newton watched all of this from her cage with what Harry had come to recognize as cautious approval. An hour in, the compartment door opened again. The girl who appeared was carrying a large book and wearing robes that were slightly too new and pressed in a way that suggested they'd been ironed that morning by someone who wanted them to be right. She had brown hair and an alert, bright-eyed quality that reminded Harry of himself in the early days at Peter's, the energy of someone who had decided that learning was the best possible response to an uncertain world. "Has anyone seen a toad?" she said. "A boy named Neville's lost one." "Not in here," Ron said. She looked at Harry. She looked at his notebook. She looked at the stack of books on the rack above his trunk. 19 was a lot, and they were visible. Her eyes went slightly wider. "Are those all your books?" she said. "Yes," Harry said. "All for first year, not all of them." He glanced up. "About 8 are supplementary." She came into the compartment. She did it without asking, which Harry thought was probably unconscious rather than rude. She was following the books. "I'm Hermione Granger," she said, looking at the spines with an expression he recognized completely, because he'd worn it at every new bookshelf for years. "I've read all the standard first-year texts already, and Magical Theory and A History of Magic. Are those both charms references?" "Advanced, the blue one's Theory of Spellwork Construction," Harry said. "The red one's Etymology of Incantations, which is interesting because if you understand the linguistic roots you get a much better sense of the mechanism before you even attempt the casting," Hermione finished. She looked at him properly now, for the first time since the books. "I thought that exactly. I said it to my parents and they had no idea what I was talking about." "Muggle-born," Harry said. "Yes, is that, me too on my mother's side, first generation." Something in Hermione's posture changed very slightly, a degree of ease, a small release of tension he suspected she wasn't aware of. Being first generation in a world with opinions about that was its own specific experience. He recognized the weight of it from his mother's letter. Ron was looking between them with an expression that was approximately 60% bemused and 40% slightly alarmed, as though he'd gotten on a train expecting a normal journey and had somehow ended up in a seminar. "Ron Weasley," he said, introducing himself to Hermione, who shook his hand with great seriousness. "I've read about your family," she said. "Weasleys are a significant, in historical terms. I'm sorry, is that odd to say?" "Probably," Ron said cheerfully. "My mum would love you." Hermione sat down. She'd apparently decided to stay, Toad search temporarily suspended, which Harry thought was the right call. Newton gave her the same cautious approval she'd given Ron, and Hermione looked back at the owl with the respectful attention of someone who had done her research on magical creatures and understood that owls were more than they appeared. Harry Potter, Hermione said, as though placing it. She looked at his forehead briefly, and then, unlike Ron, she made no face about it, just processed and moved on. I've read about you. The books are, well, they're not much. There's almost no primary source material about what actually happened. I know, Harry said. I've looked. Do you know what did happen that night? Some of it, Harry said. Not all of it, not yet. Hermione looked at him with the specific and slightly impatient energy of someone who has identified a puzzle that lacks sufficient data. We should compare notes, she said. Yeah, Harry said. Let's. Ron looked between them again. I feel like this compartment got much more complicated than I expected, he said. Wait until you've heard about the contested Gringotts account, Harry said. Ron stared at him. The what? The rest of the journey passed with the comfortable speed of good company. Harry explained what he'd found at Gringotts in broad strokes: the frozen account, the executor's name, the 10 years of held assets. Hermione cross-referenced everything against what she'd read with the focused intensity of someone running error-checking protocols. Ron listened with the slightly stunned expression of someone discovering that reality was considerably more complicated than advertised, but he listened properly, not just waiting for his turn to talk, which Harry had come to understand was rarer than it should be. Dumbledore, Hermione said carefully. He's the greatest wizard alive, by most accounts. By most accounts, Harry agreed. But I don't know yet, Harry said. I have questions, I'm going to answer them. He paused. He might have had reasons, good ones. I'm not assuming bad faith, but I'm not assuming good faith either just because someone has a reputation. Hermione looked at him with an expression that was possibly the most approval he'd seen from someone he'd known for 3 hours. That's extremely reasonable, she said. My guardian taught me that, Harry said. He said reputation is a lagging indicator. What someone does right now is more informative than what everyone says about them. Your guardian sounds, Hermione started, and then seemed to consider how to finish, very specific. He is, Harry said. Yeah. The castle arrived like a fact rather than a surprise, something that felt, as the boats crossed the black water toward it, like it had always existed and they were simply catching up to it. Harry looked at it the way he looked at everything important, steadily, without drama, taking in the towers and the lit windows and the scale of it, the way it sat on the rock as though it had grown there. Ron said, wicked, which seemed to cover it. The boats docked. A large man with a large lantern and an even larger beard herded them toward the castle door with the specific authority of someone who has done this many times and has affection for the process. He introduced himself as Hagrid and addressed Harry with a warmth that was personal rather than performative, which Harry noted. Hagrid had known his parents. He was fairly certain of it. Knew your mum and dad, Hagrid confirmed, when Harry fell into step beside him for a moment. His voice got slightly rough at the edges when he said it. Good people, really good people. Tell me about them sometime, Harry said, if you want. Hagrid looked at him with an expression that was caught between grief and something much warmer. Yeah, he said. I'd like that, I would. The entrance hall was enormous, cold, lit by floating candles. Harry looked up at the enchanted ceiling, not because it surprised him, he'd read about it, but because knowing something exists and standing under it are different experiences. Stars, an October sky, real time. He thought about the roof of the Queen's apartment and felt something that wasn't homesickness exactly, something more like alignment, the sense of being in the right place at the right time. A severe-looking woman in emerald green robes introduced herself as Professor McGonagall with an economy of words that Harry immediately respected, and explained the sorting with a brevity that suggested she'd given this speech approximately 1,000 times and saw no reason to embellish it. What's the sorting exactly? Someone near the back whispered. Some kind of test, someone else said. It's a hat, Harry said quietly to Hermione and Ron, the sorting hat. Magical, sentient to a degree, it assesses personality and aptitude and places you based on your dominant characteristics. Hermione gave him the look. How do you know? Historical accounts. Fairly detailed ones if you go back far enough in the academic literature rather than the popular histories. He paused. I spent a week on it. Ron stared at him. You spent a week researching a hat. It decides where you live for 7 years. It seemed worth understanding. McGonagall returned and led them through the doors and into the Great Hall, which was the castle introducing itself properly, the ceiling enormous, the house tables long and noisy and candlelit, hundreds of faces turned toward the first years. Harry walked with everyone else through the gauntlet of being looked at, and felt the attention like weather, ambient, significant, requiring no particular response. He spotted Draco Malfoy at the Slytherin table before Draco spotted him. Draco was talking to someone beside him, but his eyes were moving across the first years as they filed in, and when they landed on Harry, they stopped. Harry met his gaze for a moment. Draco nodded precisely, which Harry returned in kind. The hat was placed on a stool. It sang. Harry listened to the song with genuine attention, because it contained information if you actually listened to it, the history of the school's founding, the nature of the house divisions, and between the lines, a suggestion that the divisions had not always been as fixed as they'd become. Interesting. Then they called names. Granger, Hermione. Hermione went up with the expression of someone who had prepared thoroughly for an examination and was still slightly afraid of it. The hat was on her head for about 4 seconds before it called, Gryffindor. She walked to the table with her chin high and her hands very steady at her sides. Longbottom, Neville. The round-faced boy from the platform, still apparently distressed about the toad, who turned out to have been in his pocket the whole time, sat under the hat for longer, almost a minute, while the hat seemed to be making an argument that Neville was resisting. Harry watched this with interest. Eventually, Gryffindor. Neville looked slightly surprised and very relieved. Malfoy Draco. The hat touched Draco's head and said Slytherin, before it had even settled fully. Draco went to the table with his composure fully intact, but Harry, who had spent 40 minutes on a train learning to read him, noticed the very slight set of his jaw that meant he didn't know whether to be satisfied or simply confirmed. Potter Harry. The hall went quiet in a way that was specifically about him. Harry walked to the stool. He sat down. McGonagall placed the hat on his head. It slid down over his eyes and went dark, and then a voice was in his head, old, dry, slightly amused. Well, the hat said, now here's something unusual. Hello, Harry thought back, which seemed to surprise it. You can hear me clearly, the hat said. Most first years can, but they usually don't respond so directly. You're sentient, Harry thought. Responding seems polite. Quite a pause. He had the sense of being examined at considerable depth, not unpleasantly, the way of something very experienced and fundamentally curious. You've been trained, yes, in ways quite outside what I'd normally see. There's a layering here. The magical and something alongside it that isn't magical. Discipline, physical conditioning, tactical thinking. Someone built this deliberately. Yes, Harry said again. And underneath all of it, the hat said more quietly, someone who spent 6 years in a very small space and made something extraordinary out of it anyway. Another pause. That's courage, you know, not the showy kind, the bone-deep kind. Harry said nothing. He didn't argue with it. He also didn't disagree. Now, the hat said, with what felt like genuine interest, where to put you. Slytherin would use your ambition and your strategic mind. Ravenclaw would celebrate your intellect. And Gryffindor, where do you think? Harry asked. I think, the hat said slowly, that you'd do well in any of them. I also think you already know where you want to go, and I think your reasons are sound, and I think the most interesting version of the next 7 years has you. Yes, I think so. Gryffindor. The Gryffindor table made significant noise. Harry walked to it with the same level step he'd walked up with and sat down next to Hermione, who had saved him a space with deliberate intent. Ron landed at Gryffindor 2 names later, Weasley Ronald, and dropped into the seat on Harry's other side with an expression of pure relief. I was worried I'd get Hufflepuff, Ron said. Not that there's anything. Hufflepuff's underrated, Harry said. Loyalty and dedication consistently outperform raw talent over time. The research on long-term outcomes. You've done research on house outcomes, Ron said. Yes, of course you have, Ron said, with the specific tone of someone making their peace with something. Dinner materialized on the table, and the Great Hall became about food for a while, which was exactly the right pace change. Harry ate properly and watched the staff table with attention. He'd done enough research to put names to most of the faces. Flitwick, small and bright-eyed. Charms, Sprout, earthy and warm. Herbology, Snape, black robes. Expression of controlled displeasure. Potions. And at the center, in a high-backed chair, Albus Dumbledore. Old. That was the first thing, genuinely, significantly old in the way that very few people got to be. Silver hair and beard, half-moon spectacles, robes in a deep blue that caught the candlelight. He was talking to McGonagall beside him and laughing at something she'd said, and his face in laughter was warm and real. He looked like someone's grandfather. He looked like someone who genuinely liked the world. He also looked like someone who made decisions and lived with them, which was a different kind of face if you knew how to read it. Dumbledore's eyes moved across the first years at the Gryffindor table as though drawn, and found Harry with a precision that confirmed he'd been looking, and held his gaze for a moment. Harry held it back, evenly, not aggressively, just meeting it, Something moved in Dumbledore's expression, surprise, recalibration, and something that might have been sorrow so briefly it could have been imagined. Then he smiled warmly and looked away. Harry turned back to his food. "He was looking at you," Hermione said quietly. "Yes," Harry said. "Does that bother you?" "No," Harry said. "I'm looking at him too." The first week of classes established several things simultaneously. Charms. Harry had spent a year on theoretical spellwork construction and understood the mechanism behind every first-year charm before he attempted it. His casting was clean and precise, and occasionally surprised Professor Flitwick into making a high-pitched sound of delight. He didn't show off. He simply did it correctly, which was more useful than showing off anyway. Transfiguration. McGonagall started them on matchstick to needle. Harry had his needle in 4 minutes, which McGonagall examined with an expression that moved from surprise to satisfaction to the careful neutral of someone deciding whether to encourage further. She held his needle up to the class as the example, which Harry accepted without embarrassment or pride, just acknowledgement. "Mr. Potter," she said afterward when the class was filing out, "where did you study? Your foundation is not what I'd expect from a first year with no formal magical education." "Informal study," Harry said. "My guardian and I worked on the underlying principles. I find that if I understand the mechanism, the execution follows more naturally." McGonagall looked at him over her glasses, with an expression he was starting to recognize as her version of approval, which was architectural. It built slowly and held weight. "That is precisely the correct approach," she said. "Most first years attempt to brute force their way through on repetition. Repetition without understanding is just muscle memory," Harry said. "It doesn't generalize." McGonagall made a sound. "Indeed," she said. "On your way, Mr. Potter." Potions was Snape. Snape began the class with a speech that Harry listened to with genuine interest, because the content underneath the performance was actually quite sophisticated. Potions as a precise art, the chemistry of magical catalysis, the importance of understanding what each ingredient actually did rather than following instructions by rote. Harry agreed with all of it and thought Snape was probably an excellent teacher underneath the layer of theater he was performing. The theater became specifically interesting when Snape reached Harry's name in the register. "Potter," Snape said, and the pause before his name was a weapon deployed with precision, laden with expectation and what Harry read as preloaded contempt. "Our new celebrity." Harry looked at him. "Professor," he said, neutral, polite. Snape's eyes narrowed very slightly. He'd expected something, Harry thought, embarrassment or puffed-up indignation, or the particular fluster of a child who'd been singled out. He didn't get any of those. "Tell me, Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormhood?" Harry had read magical drafts and potions twice and advanced potion-making once. "A powerful sleeping potion known as the Draft of Living Death," he said. "The asphodel creates the base soporific compound and the wormhood acts as a magical catalyst, significantly amplifying the effect. The ratio is critical, too much asphodel, and the effect becomes permanent rather than reversible." Snape stared at him. "The name comes from the mythological associations," Harry continued. "Asphodel is connected to the dead in Greek mythology. The naming convention in potions is usually etymologically meaningful." The class was very quiet. "Where would you look?" Snape said, recovering. "If I told you to find a bezoar." "Stomach of a goat," Harry said, though the potency varies significantly by the goat's diet and the region it was raised in. Mountain goats from certain regions produce stronger bezoars. There's a quality grading system used by most apothecaries. Snape set down his notes. He looked at Harry with an expression that was doing something complicated. The contempt was still there, but it was being overlaid by something that didn't know quite where to settle. He had constructed, Harry understood, a specific idea of what Harry Potter was going to be. That idea was not currently presenting itself. "What is the difference?" Snape said, slower now, "between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "They're the same plant," Harry said, "also known as aconite. It's one plant with multiple names, which is common in herbological nomenclature. The naming depends on historical context and regional tradition. The same preparation is used in the wolfsbane potion, which manages the symptoms of lycanthropy by allowing the drinker to retain their mind during the transformation." Silence. "That last detail," Snape said carefully, "is not in the first-year textbook." "No," Harry agreed. "It's in a third-year supplementary text. I found it interesting, so I kept going." He paused. "Is that a problem, Professor?" The class held its breath. Snape looked at him for a long moment. Something was moving behind his eyes that Harry filed under long-term variable monitor. The performance recalibrated. The contempt was still there, but its target had shifted slightly. It was looking for a new angle, a new point of entry. Harry was already mapping its most likely approaches and finding none of them particularly threatening. 10 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, which was clearly costing him something. For apparently having read a textbook above your level. He turned to the class. The rest of you might consider taking a similar approach to your education. He moved on and the class exhaled and Harry opened his notebook. Beside him, Hermione had been sitting with her hand partially raised throughout this entire exchange, which Harry thought was extremely charming. She put her hand down when it became clear the questioning phase was over. "I knew all of those," she said, quietly, not bitterly. "I know you did," Harry said. "He wasn't going to give you the satisfaction, though. He wanted to catch me out. Different target, different dynamic." Hermione looked at him. "You knew he was going to do that. He telegraphed it when he said celebrity," Harry said. "He had a plan for the encounter. I just didn't fit the plan." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "You're going to make this school very interesting," she said. "I hope so," Harry said. "Otherwise 7 years seems long." By the end of the first week, the common room had developed an opinion of Harry Potter that was not quite what anyone had expected. Not the chosen one, luminous and predestined. Not the wide-eyed orphan discovering magic for the first time. Something more confusing, a first year who read advanced texts for fun and climbed things instinctively and held conversations like someone older without being condescending about it, who was friendly without being eager to be liked, who seemed completely at home in his own skin in a way that first years weren't supposed to be. Fred and George Weasley had introduced themselves on day 2 by sitting on either side of him at breakfast and delivering, in perfect synchronicity, a comprehensive tour of every secret passage and prank mechanism they'd discovered in their 4 years at school. Harry had listened, asked 3 clarifying questions about the structural logic of the passages, and told them about a maintenance hatch behind the 3rd-floor tapestry that they hadn't found yet. Fred and George had looked at each other with the expression of people who had just found something valuable. "We like you," Fred said. "Good instincts," George said. "Thanks," Harry said and went back to his breakfast. On Halloween, the troll got in. Harry knew something was wrong before the announcement, that tight-air feeling he'd been developing for years, the read that wasn't quite a sense but functioned like one. He was at the Gryffindor table when it prickled up the back of his neck, and he set down his fork and looked at the doors, and 30 seconds later Quirrell came stumbling in with the troll news and everyone started screaming. In the chaos of evacuation, he remembered Hermione. She'd been in the bathroom since before the feast, he'd clocked her absence, had noted that something Ron had said earlier in the day was the kind of thing that would hurt if you cared about being accepted, which Hermione very much did. He'd meant to address it. He moved against the crowd. Ron was doing the same thing from the other direction. Harry spotted him fighting upstream through the flow of students, and something moved through Harry that was warmth and confirmation both. Ron had also remembered. Ron was also going. They found each other at the bathroom corridor. "Hermione's in there," Harry said. "Yeah," Ron said. He had a look on his face that was several things at once, guilt about the earlier comment, fear, and a determination that had kicked in over both. "The troll, I know," Harry said. "Come on." They went in. The troll was not a metaphor for anything. It was a 12-foot-tall, concrete-gray, club-wielding reality that smelled considerably worse than advertised, and had already destroyed most of the bathroom stalls in a way that suggested it hadn't arrived with a plan and was improvising. Hermione was backed against the far wall, frozen not with stupidity, but with the very reasonable paralysis of encountering something that did not fit any prior experiential category. Harry assessed the space in approximately 1 second, ceiling height insufficient for the troll's full swing range, narrow for its bulk, slippery floor from the water pipes it had destroyed, Hermione's position giving her one exit route if the troll was occupied. He picked up a tap from the destroyed sink beside the door and threw it at the troll's head. Hard, accurate, the troll turned. "Hermione," Harry called. "Door, go now," she went. Ron grabbed her arm and moved her toward the exit, and Harry went the other direction, keeping the troll's attention because he was considerably faster than it and the space, while tight, was workable. The troll swung. Harry ducked, not frantic, controlled, went under the swing and came up on the other side, reached for his holly wand. "Wingardium Leviosa," Ron shouted from the doorway. He'd gotten Hermione behind him and had his wand out, and the spell caught the troll's club on a backswing and yanked it upward, and the troll, confused, looked at its own hand, and the club, released, dropped straight back down onto the troll's head. The troll sat down heavily, then lay down. The floor shook. Silence. Water dripping from the destroyed pipes. Newton would have found this disrespectful, Harry thought, and the thought was slightly giddy, which meant the adrenaline was moving through him and he was letting it rather than fighting it. Hermione came back through the door. She looked at Harry. She looked at Ron. She looked at the troll. "I had it," Harry said with the ghost of a smile. "I know you did," Hermione said, voice completely steady in a way that meant she was managing herself very deliberately. Ron's spell was better for the situation. "Ron's spell was excellent," Harry said. He looked at Ron. Ron was looking at the troll with an expression that was working through surprise at his own effectiveness. "I've been practicing that one," he said. "The feather never went above 3 inches. "Trolls are heavier than feathers," Harry noted. Ron blinked, then laughed, a real one, startled out of him, which broke the remaining tension in the room. McGonagall arrived with Snape and Quirrell in time to find 3 first-years standing over an unconscious troll in a demolished bathroom. Her expression moved through a rapid sequence: relief, alarm, fury, and then something that recalibrated when she realized no one was actually hurt. Snape looked at Harry with the specific attention he'd been paying him all week, the one that was still looking for its angle. Quirrell kept his eyes on the troll. McGonagall took 5 points from Gryffindor for dangerous rule-breaking, and then gave 15 back for sheer nerve and presence of mind, which Harry thought was a fairly reasonable net outcome. In the corridor afterward, while McGonagall was dealing with the troll, Hermione said to Ron, "I'm sorry about the thing you said earlier." Ron opened his mouth, closed it. "No," he said. "I'm sorry, I was being an idiot." "You were," Hermione said, "but you also came back for me." She paused. "So I think we're even." Ron looked slightly stunned, as though he'd expected a longer argument. Harry said nothing, just watched them find their footing with each other. This was also something Peter had taught by example. Sometimes the most useful thing you can do is get out of the way and let people be. "Friends," Ron said. "Friends," Hermione said. And then, because she was Hermione, "though I reserve the right to tell you when you're being an idiot in future." "Yeah, all right," Ron said, with a grin that was both resigned and warm. The 3 of them walked back to Gryffindor Tower together, past the gargoyles and the staircases and the portraits that watched with polite interest. Newton was waiting when Harry got in, sitting on his 4-poster with the expression of someone who had heard the whole story and found it adequate. He sat on the bed and wrote to Peter. "Troll in the bathroom tonight," he wrote. "Handled. Ron Weasley turned out to be useful in a crisis, which I suspected but didn't know. Hermione's good. Both of them are, you'd like them. More importantly, I like them, which I've decided is the more relevant metric. Also, Quirrell, there's something wrong with the air around him. I can't quantify it yet. The same read as the troll warning, but older and quieter. I'm monitoring it. And Dumbledore watched me through the whole Halloween feast before the troll. Not suspiciously, more like he was working something out. I'm not sure what I am to him yet, but I will be. Everything else is fine. The castle is extraordinary. I think I like it here." He folded it, gave it to Newton, and watched her disappear through the dormitory window into the Scottish dark. Then he lay back on the 4-poster and listened to the castle. It had sounds of its own, deep, structural, the kind of sounds buildings make when they're alive to something beyond their materials. He'd expected to feel far from home and found he didn't quite. He felt like himself. He felt like the thing he'd been building himself into for 5 years had arrived somewhere it could be properly tested. He pulled out notebook 16 and wrote, "Quirrell, 3rd floor corridor. Dumbledore, the why of it all." Below it, 1 month down, he fell asleep with the notebook on the pillow. Chapter 5, The Stone. December came to Hogwarts like a stage designer had been given a brief and an unlimited budget. Snow on the battlements, frost on the windows, the great hall smelling of pine and candle wax, and whatever magical component made the enchanted decorations shimmer slightly when you weren't looking directly at them. Harry noticed all of it with the appreciation of someone experiencing a first winter somewhere extraordinary, and then set it aside and focused on Quirrell. He'd been building the profile since Halloween. Not dramatically, not with any confrontation. That wasn't the point yet. The point was data. Every Quirrell Quirrell interaction, catalog. The way he moved around certain topics in defense class. The way he positioned himself at the staff table relative to Snape, which Harry had originally misread as the geometry of hostility, but had since revised to the geometry of performance. Quirrell was pointing the attention somewhere specific and away from something else. The way he smelled, underneath the garlic that everyone else found repellent and Harry found interesting, there was something underneath it, something chemical and cold that his read responded to like a compass to a specific north. He'd also been watching the 3rd floor. The restricted corridor was a fact everyone knew and almost everyone avoided. Harry had gone to look at the door on his 2nd week, stood outside it for 4 minutes, and felt the same tight-air sensation he'd felt at Halloween, layered and dense. He hadn't opened the door. He'd taken the feeling as data and left, because opening the door at week 2 with no more information than something's wrong in there was not a plan. It was a reflex, and Peter had spent 5 years teaching him the difference. By the time Christmas arrived and most of the castle emptied for the holidays, Harry had a framework. Something was being kept on the 3rd floor. It was significant enough to warrant heavy security and Dumbledore's specific interest. Quirrell was involved, not tangentially, centrally. The cold, wrong air around Quirrell was not native to Quirrell, which meant it was coming from something or someone else. And Snape, who Harry had revised upward in his estimation twice since the potions class, was watching Quirrell with the attention of someone managing a known variable. He wrote the framework up in Notebook 17 and reviewed it on Christmas morning. He was sitting cross-legged on his 4-poster with the notebook and a mince pie from the feast the night before when the post arrived. Newton came through the window with 2 packages and a letter. The packages were from May Good Chocolate, a book on urban photography that was technically for Peter, but Harry had listed it knowing full well he'd read it first. And from Peter, a box that contained a letter and nestled in tissue paper, something small and flat and matte black that Harry turned over in his hands until he understood what it was. A modified web shooter. Thinner, more compact, reconfigured for his hands specifically, and disguised as a wide bracelet on one side. 2 cartridges in the box, Peter's handwriting on a note tucked inside. For emergencies, you know how to use it. Don't use it unless it's an emergency. I know you know, I said it anyway. Harry strapped it on. He fired a test line at the dormitory wall, precise, controlled, retracting cleanly. Newton watched with the expression of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by anything. He read Peter's letter. Peter had spent 2 weeks in London after Harry's departure. He wrote, digging. He'd found things. The contested Gringotts account was part of a larger picture. There were records, if you knew where to look, that Voldemort's first fall hadn't been as complete as the wizarding world believed. There were people in the ministry who knew more than they said. There were decisions made in 1981 that had never been subject to any oversight, any review, any democratic process of the wizarding world's own governance. A lot had been decided by one person, with the best of intentions, without being asked. I'm not saying Dumbledore is a villain, Peter wrote. I'm saying he thinks in chess, not in people. He places his pieces where he calculates they'll do the most good, and he doesn't always check with the pieces first. That's a different problem than malice. In some ways, it's a harder one. The Ragnarok meeting is scheduled for December 26th. I'll be there. Stay safe, stay smart, trust your read. Peter P.S. If anything's going wrong in that castle, you tell me. I know you'll handle it. I still want to know. Harry put the letter in his jacket pocket, ate the mince pie, and went down to the common room. The castle was quiet in the holiday way, almost empty, a different quality of sound to the stones, the usual crowd noise replaced by something older and more fundamental. He liked it. He liked the castle most when he could hear it think. He spent the morning in the library. The restricted section had a gate that was technically locked and practically a formality, because Harry had spent a month mapping the library's organizational structure and knew that 3 of the unrestricted shelves in the back corner contained texts that referenced the same subjects as the restricted ones, just at one remove, theory rather than application, frameworks rather than specifics. He used those and Hermione's extraordinarily comprehensive research notes, which she'd left him access to with the air of someone extending significant trust. And by the time lunch arrived, he'd constructed a reasonable picture of what Nicholas Flamel's Philosopher's Stone did, how it worked, and why someone trying to reconstitute themselves from a state of very nearly dead would want it very badly. He sat back and looked at the ceiling. Voldemort was alive. Not fully diminished, parasitic, looking for a host and a method. The stone was the method, Quirrell was the host. It was actually a reasonably elegant plan. He found himself respecting the logic of it, the way he'd found himself respecting the web fluid equations when the math was clean even when the application was going to cause him trouble. He wrote in Notebook 17, the stone is here. Quirrell is the mechanism. Timeline is probably before the end of the year. He'll want it before anyone gets close enough to look. Then what does Dumbledore know? More importantly, what has he planned for? Then with underline, am I part of the plan? He thought about the Mirror of Arist, which he'd heard mentioned in peripheral conversations around the staff table twice, and which his reading had told him was one of the security layers, a mirror that showed desire, used as a trap because someone who wanted to use the stone would see themselves using it, while someone who only wanted to find it would see it in their pocket. Layered enchantment. Clever. He also thought, whoever designed this system had a specific person in mind to navigate it. And he had a fairly confident theory about who that person was supposed to be. He closed the notebook and went to find Ron. Ron had stayed for the holidays because his parents were visiting his brother in Romania, and he was managing this with the cheerful pragmatism of someone who is used to large families and their logistical chaos. He was in the common room playing chess against himself, both sides, which he said was the only way to get a proper challenge. Harry sat across from him and watched. "The stone," Harry said after a while. Ron moved a bishop. "Philosopher's stone, Flamels. Yes, it's here, in the school." On the third floor, Ron looked up. "Quirrell is trying to get it," Harry said. "For Voldemort." Ron flinched at the name. Then he steadied visibly and looked at Harry with the expression that meant he was switching from casual to serious. He was good at this, the gear change. It happened cleanly, no drama. "You're sure? About the stone being here, yes. About Quirrell, very high confidence. About Voldemort being specifically involved." Harry tilted his head. "The alternative is that something else is generating the cold-wrong feeling I've been tracking on Quirrell for 3 months, and I can't construct a more parsimonious explanation." Ron was quiet for a moment. "You've been tracking Quirrell for 3 months." "Yes, and you're telling me now because I have enough data now," Harry said. "Before this it was a pattern without a conclusion. Now it's a pattern with a conclusion." He paused. "Also, Hermione's not here, and I want to tell both of you together, but this seemed urgent enough to start." Ron looked at the chessboard. He looked at Harry. "What are you going to do? Find out what's in the third-floor corridor specifically," Harry said. "Understand the full security architecture, and then make a decision about timing. Timing of what? When to move." Ron was quiet for longer this time. Outside, snow was landing against the common room windows. The fire shifted. "You need help," Ron said. It wasn't a question. "I might," Harry said. "I wanted you to know that it might be necessary." "I'm in," Ron said immediately. Obviously, completely. He moved another chess piece without looking at it. "When Hermione gets back, she's going to want to have been part of this conversation." "I know," Harry said. "We'll redo it. She'll make us do it from the beginning." "I'm counting on it," Harry said. "She'll find the parts I missed." Ron looked at him. "You think you've missed parts? Everyone misses parts," Harry said. "That's why you have people you trust." Christmas dinner was 7 of them at the Gryffindor table. Harry, Ron, the Weasley twins, Neville, and 2 fifth-years who seemed mostly interested in the turkey. Fred and George performed what they called a festive survey of structural vulnerabilities after dinner, which translated to trying every trick passage in the castle and coming back to report. Harry listened to their reports with attention because half of them were directly relevant to the geography he'd been mapping. He also found that evening the invisibility cloak. It arrived in an unmarked package with a note in looping, familiar writing. "Your father left this in my possession before he died. It is time it was returned to you. A Merry Christmas." No signature. Harry held the cloak. He ran it through his fingers. It was not like fabric. It was like running your hands through light that had decided to behave differently. He put it on and looked in the dormitory mirror, and where he'd been there was now only the room behind him, and the room was entirely ordinary. He thought about his father, not with the weight he sometimes felt, not tonight. Tonight it was more like receiving something that had been held for him. It is time it was returned. He folded the cloak carefully and put it with his notebook. Then he went to the 3rd floor. He'd been thinking about it for 2 hours, and the shape of it was clear. Now was the time to understand what was actually in there, while the castle was quiet and the corridors were empty. Not to act, just to know. The cloak was extraordinary for this kind of movement. Not because he needed it to hide. He was very good at not being seen when he didn't want to be, but because it was an additional layer of certainty in a situation where the margin of error was deliberately small. The door on the 3rd floor had a basic locking charm that he undid with the vine would wand in about 4 seconds. He pushed it open. The dog inside was enormous. 3 heads, and Harry had read about Fluffy, Hagrid's, apparently, which was its own remarkable piece of information, and understood the mechanism, music, but was still impressed by the sheer physical reality of it. 3 sets of eyes, all of them bleary with sleep, one of them cracking open and focusing on the door before Harry produced the flute from his jacket pocket. He'd been carrying it for 3 weeks on a hunch, and played the 5 notes he'd worked out from the sound theory. Fluffy's eyes closed. The great chest heaved in sleep. Harry moved past, found the trapdoor, and looked down. Then he climbed back out, closed the door, and went to find Ron. 6 layers, he said. "I got down as far as I could without making anything happen that I couldn't undo." He spread his notes on Ron's bedside table. "Devil's Snare, that's Professor Sprout, plant-based, responds to light and heat. Enchanted Keys, Flitwick, flying, you'd need a broomstick. Chessman, McGonagall, you'd need to play through." He tapped the next note. Something with a troll, already dealt with if it's the same one from Halloween, which I think it might be. Potion's logic puzzle, I think that's Snape, based on the methodology, and the mirror. Ron stared at the notes. You went through the trapdoor, to the 4th layer, then I came back, by yourself, in the dark, with the cloak and a very good light charm. Harry looked at him. I needed to know the full layout before we decide anything. Hermione is going to be furious, Ron said. Hermione is going to be grateful for the data, Harry said. Eventually, after the furious part. Yes, Harry agreed. After that, Ron picked up the notes and read them properly. His face moved through surprise, admiration, and something that resolved into the gear change expression. When, he said. Not until there's a reason to go through to the end, Harry said. Right now it's contained. If Quirrell makes a move, if something changes, we go. And if Dumbledore has a plan. Then his plan gains an additional variable it wasn't accounting for, Harry said, which I think is fine. Hermione came back on the 27th, 2 days after Christmas, with new books and the look of someone who had spent the holiday reading and was refreshed rather than bored by this. Harry and Ron told her everything in the common room over the course of 2 hours, and her reactions were fury that they'd gone to the 3rd floor without her expected, relief that they'd come back safely, real, instant and comprehensive engagement with the tactical problem, also expected. This was Hermione, and 3 observations about the security architecture that Harry hadn't considered, which was exactly why he'd wanted to tell her. The potions puzzle, Hermione said, reading his notes with her finger tracking the page. If it's Snape, the logic will be internally consistent but potentially solvable by process of elimination. You'd need to be good at logical deduction under pressure, Harry said. Yes, that's you. Hermione looked up. You've already decided which parts we each do. I've made an initial assignment, Harry said, subject to revision based on your input. Hermione and Ron looked at each other. Something passed between them, the new shorthand of the friendship that had been forged over Halloween and then deepened over the weeks since. He's already planned it, Ron said. Of course he has, Hermione said. She looked back at Harry. Tell me the assignments. The Devil's Snare is actually the simplest, fire or strong light. I can do that cleanly. The keys I can do because of my flying. Ron plays the chess. He said this with certainty. Ron blinked. Me, you're the best chess player in Gryffindor, Harry said, and the enchanted chessmen will play like a real game, which means they'll play like your game if you approach it correctly. Logic and positional thinking under pressure. He looked at him. That's yours. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then he straightened slightly, the physical equivalent of accepting a weight. Right, he said. Okay, the potions, Harry said to Hermione. I've already started working through the likely logic structures, she said, pulling out her own notebook and showing him 2 pages of grid analysis. If it's a constraint satisfaction problem, the solution method depends on the encoding. I think I can crack it in under 4 minutes. Good. Harry sat back. And the mirror is mine. What's in the mirror? Hermione said. Desire, Harry said. It shows what you want most. And I know what I want most, which is to keep the stone out of Voldemort's hands, which means I'll see it rather than see myself using it. He paused. That's the trap. I'm not going to fall into it. Hermione looked at him carefully. Are you sure? She said, not unkindly. Knowing what the trap is doesn't mean it won't catch you. The mirror might show you something you weren't expecting. Harry held her gaze. He thought about his parents' letter, about the photograph in his inside pocket, about the bench in the Queen's apartment and Peter falling asleep over thesis notes, about all the things he wanted. It might, he said, but I know what I actually want and it isn't the stone. So whatever the mirror shows me, I'll be working the right problem. Hermione held his gaze for another moment, assessing. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. February, March, April. The term deepened and the weather softened incrementally, and Harry tracked Quirrell with the methodical patience of someone who had learned that timing was a skill, not just a virtue. The Quidditch match in February, Harry had made the team, which Oliver Wood had announced with the evangelical fervor of someone experiencing a religious event, because Harry on a broom was something that made people stop talking mid-sentence. He played Seeker. He played it the way he did everything, with complete attention and a tactical overlay that meant he was tracking the snitch and the 3 bludgers and every player on the field simultaneously. He also noticed during the match that Snape was muttering under his breath while making eye contact with Harry's broom, and that Harry's broom responded by bucking and shaking, and that across the stands Quirrell, in contrast, was watching Harry with an intensity that was not sports enthusiasm. He caught the snitch in 7 minutes. Then he went to find Hermione, who had already figured out what Snape was doing. He was breaking your broom's charm, she said. Counterjinx, I know. But not the way you think. Harry had been turning it over since the match. Snape was working counterjinx on my behalf. Someone else was doing the jinxing. He looked at her. Snape has been watching Quirrell for as long as I have, he knows. Hermione went very still. So Dumbledore's plan has moving parts that are working against each other without full information sharing, Harry said, which is what happens when you think in chess instead of people. May arrived, and with it the shift he'd been waiting for. The wrong air around Quirrell changed, not stronger exactly, but more urgent, the quality of something running out of time. Harry felt it on a Tuesday morning in Charms and spent the rest of the day in a state of focused readiness that Ron noticed immediately. It's happening, Ron said, at dinner. Soon, Harry said, maybe tonight. Maybe not tonight, but this week. How do you know? Harry thought about the 5 years of rooftop training, the notebooks of magic experiments, the late-night conversations about how to read a room with something beyond normal perception. I just know, he said, the same way I knew about the troll. Ron nodded. He ate his dinner. He said, do we tell McGonagall, Dumbledore? Harry had been thinking about this for 2 days. We tell McGonagall, he said, tonight. I want her to know what I know and why I know it. Whether she acts on it is her choice, but she should have the information. They went to McGonagall after dinner. Harry explained everything, the profile he'd built on Quirrell, the third-floor corridor, the security architecture, his theory about the stone and Voldemort. He was precise and organized, the data laid out clearly, the inferences labeled as inferences rather than facts. McGonagall listened. She did not interrupt. She did not dismiss. When he finished, she was very still for a long moment. Mr. Potter, she said, how long have you been building this picture? 3 months active surveillance, Harry said, with context going back to October. McGonagall looked at him over her glasses. He read something in her face that he didn't often see in adults looking at him. Not the reverence-adjacent awe he'd gotten from Ollivander, not the complicated wariness of Snape, but something more like colleague to colleague, someone revising their model of who they were talking to. I will contact the headmaster, she said. Tonight, she started again. You and your friends will not take any unilateral action. Are we clear? We're clear, Harry said, which was true. He'd said nothing about whether he'd take action in response to Quirrell taking action first, which was a different question. McGonagall seemed to hear the distinction, even unspoken. She gave him a very sharp look. Harry, she said, which was the first time she'd used his first name, and it landed differently. Be careful. I'm always careful, he said. I know, she said. I mean careful with yourself, not just with the situation. He held her gaze for a moment. He thought she might be the first person at Hogwarts besides Hagrid who had managed to look at him and see through to the actual person. Yes, Professor, he said, and meant it. She contacted Dumbledore. Dumbledore, as it turned out, had been called away, a ministry emergency, a trap so obviously set that Harry catalogued it and added it to his model and felt something cold and steady settle in his chest. He told Hermione and Ron. They sat in the common room while most of Gryffindor Tower went to sleep around them. At midnight, Harry said, he's going. Now, Hermione said. Now. Harry was already on his feet. The stone will be gone by morning if we don't. Hermione and Ron were up before he finished the sentence. The third floor was quiet and dark. The fluffy door was already open. Harry looked through the trapdoor, felt the air coming up, cold, wrong, ancient, and looked at Hermione and Ron. You don't have to, he said. Stop saying things like that, Ron said. I mean it. This is, Harry, Hermione said. We know what this is. Let's go. They went. The devil's snare caught them immediately, the tendrils wrapping fast in the dark, and Harry had the light charm up before it got a proper grip, a flare of brilliant white that made the plant recoil and gave them room to drop through. Landing, rolling up. The key chamber was extraordinary, 1,000 keys in the dark, jeweled and flickering, and one correct one and 3 broomsticks. Harry was on his broom and moving before the others had fully processed the space. This was where it stopped being a plan and became something more physical, more instinctive. He read the keys the way he read aerial spaces, their movement patterns, the way most of them moved randomly and one moved slightly differently, slightly more deliberately, as if it knew where it was supposed to be and was trying not to be found there. 4 minutes. Hermione called time from the ground. Harry Dove reached, caught the battered silver key with the bent wing on the third pass, and was back down in 2. The chess room was enormous. McGonagall's pieces were enormous. They stood like a stone army in the candlelight, and the white pieces looked at them with carved, patient attention. Ron stepped forward. He played the game with a clarity that Harry watched with something that was not just admiration, it was recognition. Ron played chess the way Harry moved through a crisis, seeing the whole board, the future states, the necessary sacrifice. He played White's pieces against what turned out to be an aggressive, adaptive black strategy that reconfigured under pressure, and he matched it move for move, talking through it quietly as he went, not to them but to himself, the internal monologue of someone deep in real work. He sacrificed himself. The Black Queen took him and he went down, and Harry started forward and stopped because Ron was already lifting his hand. Just his hand, from the stone floor. "I'm okay, go," and Harry held the pause for one more second, making sure it was true, and then moved. The troll was already unconscious. Something else had been through this room before them and was ahead of them. The timeline was moving. The potions room was cold and lit by purple fire and smelled like something very complex and slightly threatening. Hermione read the riddle on the table, read the 7 bottles, and worked through the logic grid with her notebook open and her pen moving so fast it was a blur. 5 minutes. 3 minutes. Harry watched the door they'd come through and the door ahead and felt the cauldron ahead get stronger, denser, immediate. "That one," Hermione said. She pointed without drama. "Safe passage forward. The round one to the left gets you back." "You're sure? I eliminated everything else," she said. "Yes, I'm sure." He took the forward bottle. Hermione took the return bottle. They looked at each other at the door. "Tell Ron I'll be right back," Harry said. "He knows," Hermione said. "Go." He drank the potion. He went forward. The final chamber was wide and quiet and lit by something that was not quite torchlight. The mirror of Eris stood at its center, tall and ornate, and in front of it stood Quirrell. Harry stopped in the doorway. Quirrell turned around. He looked different outside the classroom, less performative, the stutter gone, the hunched apology of his daily presentation shed like clothing. He was a person, Harry thought. An intelligent person who had made decisions that had led him here, to this room, in service of something that was eating him from the inside. There was something almost sad about it. "Harry Potter," Quirrell said. His voice was flat and steady. "I wondered when you'd arrive." "I wondered when you'd make your move," Harry said. He stepped into the room. His hands were loose at his sides, both wands available. He kept his eyes on Quirrell's hands and his peripheral vision on the mirror. "You've been here a while. The mirror won't give me the stone," Quirrell said. He said it with the frustration of someone who has tried many approaches to a puzzle and is running out of new ones. "I see myself presenting it to my master, not obtaining it, not holding it." "That's the design," Harry said. "You want to use it. The enchantment responds to intent." "Yes," Quirrell tilted his head, "which is why you're here. You don't want to use it." He looked at Harry with something that was genuinely assessing, not hostile yet. "My master thought the same. He thought you were the key. He was very sure of it. He designed me into the security system," Harry said. "Dumbledore did. The whole architecture was built with someone in mind who would want to find the stone but not use it, someone specific." He looked at the mirror. "And your master thought that would be me." Naive, terrified, just found out about the magical world, overwhelmed, easy to manipulate into the right position at the right time. Quirrell watched him. Something moved in his expression. "I'm not that," Harry said simply. He wasn't angry about it. "So I'm going to get the stone, and you're going to let me." Quirrell laughed. It was a real laugh which surprised Harry slightly. "You're 11. "Yes," Harry agreed. Quirrell raised his wand. Harry moved. Not toward the mirror, sideways, because the first thing an opponent with a wand does in a fixed space is try to put you where you can't go sideways. He was under Quirrell's arm before the first spell hit the wall behind him, rolled, came up close, Vinewood wand out, and hit Quirrell with a shield disruption charm that Hermione had found in a fourth-year text, and Harry had been practicing for a month. Quirrell staggered. Harry moved to the mirror. He looked into it. He'd been honest with Hermione about knowing what he wanted, but knowing and seeing were different, and the mirror gave him both. He saw his parents, briefly, quick, real, his mother's face as warm as her handwriting and his father's laugh exactly as described. He saw Peter on the roof in Queens, 2 cups of takeaway coffee between them and the city lights below. He saw Ron and Hermione on either side of him, which was interesting because he'd known them 3 months and apparently that was enough. And then, below all of it, in his pocket, real, physical, a smooth glass sphere containing a stone that was the deep red of old garnets, the Philosopher's Stone. He closed his fingers around it without looking down. Quirrell hit him with a binding spell. Harry's shield charm deflected most of it enough, and he turned, stone in his fist, and looked at the man across the room. "Don't," Harry said. "Give it to me," Quirrell said. He wasn't performing now. He was direct and urgent, and Harry could feel from across the room the thing that was driving him, not Quirrell's ambition, something else's, something older. "Give it to me, and I'll let you leave." "You won't," Harry said, "because the thing talking through you won't allow it." He kept his voice even. "I'm sorry about that, actually. I think you made a series of decisions that seemed logical at the time and brought you to a place you didn't fully anticipate." Quirrell stared at him. "You're going to lecture me?" "No," Harry said. "I'm going to offer you an out because I think there's enough of you left in there to hear it. Tell Dumbledore what happened, where you've been, what you were promised, what was done to you. He's not someone who punishes people for being in over their heads." He paused. "But that door closes if you make me fight the rest of this." Silence. Then Quirrell's expression changed. Part that was Quirrell receded, and something else looked out from behind his eyes, older, colder, the thing Harry had been tracking all year in the quality of the wrong air around him. "You are not what I expected," said a voice that was not Quirrell's. It was thin, high, the shadow of a voice that had once been very different. "The boy I designed the trap for would have struggled with the mirror for 10 minutes, wept perhaps, wanted his parents, wanted to be told he was loved." A pause. "You already know." "Yes," Harry said, "and you're not afraid." "Not particularly," Harry said. "Should I be?" "I killed your parents," the voice said, with a precision that was testing for something. "I know," Harry said. "That's a fact. It's not a threat. It's past tense." He shifted his weight slightly, getting his footing square, both wands now in hand. "What you do next is a threat that I'm paying attention to." The wraith, because that was what it was, Harry understood. Not a man but a remnant, a will without a body, seemed to pause. Then Quirrell's body lunged. Harry had both wands up before the movement completed. The Holly wand put up a barrier, not a standard Protego, the modified construction he'd been developing from Hermione's research, a layered diffusion charm that distributed force rather than absorbing it. The vine wood wand threw light. Not a combat spell, raw light, brilliant and white, the kind Harry could produce from his magic directly without incantation, the kind that had extinguished his aunt's lights the first time he was frightened years ago, but shaped now, controlled, directed. Quirrell's hands touched his barrier, and something happened that Harry hadn't planned for. The contact burned, not Harry, Quirrell. Wherever the man's hands touched Harry's proximity, the skin blistered and blackened with a speed that Harry had never seen, and that made his stomach turn even in the middle of the fight. Quirrell screamed. He pulled back, looked at his hands, and the voice that was not his said something in a language Harry didn't know, furious and high, and Harry felt the pressure in the room change like a weather shift. He didn't wait to understand it. He moved forward, hit Quirrell with the strongest stupefy he'd ever produced, wandless left hand, pulling from the reserve he'd built up over 5 years of magic experiments, and caught Quirrell as he fell, because the man's legs had gone and otherwise he would have hit the stone floor head first. He lowered him to the floor. He stepped back. The room was very quiet. Harry looked at his own hand, unmarked. He looked at Quirrell. He looked at the stone in his other hand. He looked at the mirror, which showed him nothing now except his own reflection, tired, breathing hard, 11 years old with his glasses pushed up in his hair in every direction and both wands in his hands, and a stone the size of a walnut that had just been the most contested object in the magical world. He sat down on the floor. He kept the stone. He sat there for what was probably 2 minutes, breathing, letting his heart rate come back down to something reasonable, cataloging the fight and what he'd learned from it. The burning on contact, his mother's protection, he thought. He'd read about sacrificial magic, the magical imprint of love freely given. He'd thought it was metaphorical. Apparently not, he thought. Peter would say that's the part that doesn't reduce to equations. He thought he'd be right. He got up. He walked out, the potions room, the corridor. He found Hermione on the other side of the purple fire, and Ron had made it back on his feet with a bruise across his jaw from the chess queen and the stubborn stance of someone who refuses to let a concussion interfere with their plans. "Did you get it?" Ron said. Harry held up the stone. Hermione made a sound. Ron's face did something complicated and genuine. "Quirrell's down," Harry said. "We need to get to McGonagall, and then someone needs to get a message to Dumbledore. And I need—" He stopped. "What?" Hermione said. "I need to write to Peter," Harry said. "Tonight, because I told him I'd tell him when things went wrong." "Is it over?" Ron said, looking at the stone. Harry looked at the stone in his palm. He thought about Voldemort's voice, not what I expected. He thought about a system of enchantments designed around a version of himself that didn't exist. He thought about a year's worth of questions that still needed answering. "This part," Harry said. "Yeah, this part's over." They walked back through the castle in the early morning, 3 first years through the silent corridors with the most powerful magical artifact in Britain in Harry's jacket pocket, and the castle made its deep structural sounds around them, and Newton was waiting at the entrance to the infirmary with a letter already attached to her leg as though she'd known. Harry unfolded it. Peter's handwriting. "I'm in Edinburgh. Got on a plane yesterday. Couldn't wait until Christmas. Let me know you're okay." Harry looked at Newton. Newton looked back with the expression of having managed things appropriately. He wrote on the back of Peter's letter, "I'm okay. We're all okay. Significant things happen. Come to Hogwarts, I have a lot to tell you." He sent Newton out the window and watched her disappear into the early morning sky over Scotland, and then he sat in the infirmary chair between Ron and Hermione and waited for Dumbledore. Chapter 6. The Other Side. Dumbledore arrived at 4 in the morning. Harry heard him before he saw him, the particular quality of authority that some people carried in their footsteps, the way a space rearranged itself slightly in advance of their arrival. He'd been awake, sitting in the chair by Ron's bed, notebook open on his knee, though he hadn't been writing in it. Hermione was asleep in the chair on the other side, her head on her folded arms, her own notebook still open on the bed beside Ron's hand. Ron was asleep properly, Madame Pomfrey having been firm about this despite his protestations. Harry had been thinking. The door opened quietly. Dumbledore came in with the unhurried movement of someone who had learned long ago that urgency and haste were different things, and only one of them was useful. He was still in his traveling robes. He'd come directly then from wherever the ministry emergency had taken him. His face was difficult to read in the low light, which Harry thought was probably intentional. "Harry," he said. "Professor," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at Ron and Hermione, then at Harry, and something in his expression settled like sediment after a disturbance. He pulled the other chair from the corner of the infirmary bay and sat across from Harry and folded his hands in his lap. "Tell me what happened," he said. Harry told him. All of it, the same way he'd told McGonagall, precise, organized, inferences labeled as inferences. He watched Dumbledore listen. He watched the old man's face move through things he was too disciplined to show fully, but not quite disciplined enough to suppress entirely. Surprised at the depth of the surveillance, Harry had been running on Quirrell, something more complicated at the chess room, something that was almost pain at the mirror. When Harry got to the part about what the mirror had shown him, he kept it brief. "It showed me what I wanted," he said, "which wasn't the stone, so I could see where it was." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "And what did it show you?" he said gently. "My parents," Harry said, "and people who matter to me." He paused. "And the stone because I wanted it where Voldemort couldn't reach it." He kept his voice level on the name, which he could see Dumbledore register. "You were not afraid," Dumbledore said. "It was not a question." "No," Harry said. "Should I have been?" Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. His blue eyes behind the half-moon spectacles were doing something complex, reading, processing, revising. Harry had the sense of being seen by someone who had spent decades learning to see people accurately, and who was finding that his existing model required significant adjustment. "The stone," Dumbledore said. Harry reached into his jacket pocket and put it on the bed between them. Dumbledore looked at it. He didn't reach for it immediately. He looked at it the way you look at something that has been the source of a great deal of trouble and is now resolved, with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been worrying about a thing for a long time and can now finally stop. "Nicholas will not be pleased," Dumbledore said, "but I suspect he will understand." He looked up. "You know what this means, destroying it. No more Philosopher's Stone," Harry said. "No more Elixir of Life. Nicholas and Perenelle Flame will die when the existing elixir runs out." He paused. "I think they'd both agree it's the right call." "They already have," Dumbledore said quietly. He looked at Harry with something new in his expression. "You've thought about it." "I think about most things," Harry said. "Professor," he let the pause have its proper weight. "I want to ask you something." Dumbledore waited. "Why," Harry said, "specifically why Privet Drive? Why the Dursleys? You had access to my parents' estate, their records, their wishes. I've seen the documents from Gringotts. My parents had designated guardians for me who weren't the Dursleys, and those designations were superseded by your decision as executor of the estate." He kept his voice even. "No anger in it, not tonight. Questions first. I want to understand the reasoning." The infirmary was very quiet. Ron's breathing, Hermione's. Outside, the first faint suggestion of dawn against the windows, the dark thinning slightly at its edges. Dumbledore looked at his hands, then at Harry. "The blood protection," he said. "Your mother's sacrifice created a magical protection, sacrificial love, the oldest form of magic. For it to hold, you needed to be placed with her blood. Petunia was the only living family on her side." He paused. "It was the strongest protection I could construct for you." "It was," Harry said. "I've read about the magic. The theory is sound." He kept the level voice. "The execution left me in a cupboard under the stairs for 6 years. Dumbledore flinched. "It was small, controlled, but real. I was not fully aware of the conditions." "Were you checking?" Harry said. A pause. "Not as often as I should have been," Dumbledore said. Why not?" Another pause longer. Dumbledore was not, Harry thought, someone who avoided hard truths about himself. He was someone who had built so many careful structures around his thinking that the truths sometimes got lodged inside them and took time to work free. "Because I told myself the protection was sufficient," he said, "and because I was focused on other things. The aftermath of Voldemort's fall was chaotic. There were many things requiring attention, and I wasn't one of them," Harry said. You were, Dumbledore said, but I believed you were safe. I told myself that was enough. He looked at Harry directly. It was not enough, I was wrong. The words landed simply. No performance in them, no seeking of absolution. Harry looked at him. He thought about the 6-year-old in the cupboard. He thought about Peter on the step of number 4 Privet Drive, saying he's coming with me with the quiet certainty of someone who had not been asked and did not need to be. He thought about what his life would have looked like if no one had stopped to listen. Thank you for saying that, Harry said. Dumbledore looked slightly surprised, as though he'd been braced for something harder. It doesn't fix what happened, Harry said, but it's honest. I can work with honest. He looked at the stone on the bed. There are other things, the contested Gringotts account, the property in Wales, the documents that were held from me. He looked up. Those need to be addressed properly. There's a legal process and I want to use it. Yes, Dumbledore said, of course. And I want information, Harry said, about my parents, about what happened that night. About Voldemort, what he is, what the connection between us means. I'm not asking for everything immediately, but I want it as I'm ready for it, not as you decide I need it. He paused. I'm not angry at you, Professor. I understand why you make decisions the way you make them, but I'm not a chess piece. Dumbledore looked at him. Something in his expression had changed considerably from when he'd walked in, not diminished, but differently arranged, more genuine, less managed. No, he said, you are not. He was quiet for a moment. You are remarkably different from what I had anticipated, Harry. I had good help, Harry said. Your guardian, Dumbledore said. He said it with the specific tone of someone who had done their own research and found it informative. Peter Parker. Yes, he is not a conventional choice of mentor, Dumbledore said carefully. No, Harry agreed. He's the right one, though. Dumbledore nodded slowly. The corners of his mouth moved in what might have been a smile, might have been something more complicated. I would like to meet him, he said. He's in Edinburgh, Harry said. He got on a plane yesterday. Dumbledore blinked. Then he did smile fully for the first time since he'd walked in. Of course he did, he said with a warmth that was genuine. Of course he did. Madame Pomfrey arrived at 5:30 and redistributed everyone firmly into beds with the authority of someone in whose domain Dumbledore's rank meant precisely nothing. And Harry let himself be redistributed because he was tired in the particular way of someone who has been moving on adrenaline for several hours and has now reached the other side of it, where the body presents its invoice. He woke at 9 to find Ron eating toast and Newton on the bedpost and a letter on the pillow. Peter's handwriting. I'm at Hogsmeade, apparently. There's a village. The pub landlord seems confused by me, but he's been helpful. A man with a magnificent beard came to find me at 7 this morning and brought me to the school grounds. He told me his name was Hagrid and that you'd mentioned him. He also told me that you faced down Voldemort last night, and he seems both terrified and proud of you in equal measure, which sounds about right. Come find me when you can move. I'll be here. Harry sat up. Newton made a sound. I know, Harry told her. He came anyway. He got out of bed, got dressed, ignored Madame Pomfrey's pointed observation that she had not discharged him, promised Ron he'd be back in an hour, and walked out of the castle into the June morning. The grounds were extraordinary in June, the mountains beyond the lake going blue-green in the early sun, the water flat and silver, the trees in full leaf and the air carrying something that might have been actual magic, or might have been Scotland taking its single reliable week of good weather seriously. Harry walked down toward the lake because Hagrid had sent a note with Newton saying Peter was there, and because Hagrid's instincts about where to put people were apparently excellent. Peter was sitting on a rock by the water. He'd clearly traveled in a hurry. He had his camera bag and what looked like an overnight duffel and the particular alertness of someone who has been awake for a long time and is managing it on quality coffee and focus. He was looking at the castle when Harry came across the grass, and he turned when Harry was about 20 feet away, and something moved across his face that was relief and the thing that came after relief, which was quieter and stayed longer. Harry sat on the rock beside him. They looked at the lake for a moment. Hagrid cried a little, Peter said. When he was telling me, he was trying not to. He does that, Harry said. He means it every time. I know. It was, yeah, Peter looked at the water. You okay? Yes, Harry said, and then, Quirrell burned when he touched me. My mother's protection. I didn't know it would do that. Peter was quiet. He's alive, Harry said. He was alive when I left. I don't know what happens to someone when the thing using them is driven out. That's not your fault, Peter said. I know, Harry said. I'm not carrying it as fault. I'm carrying it as information. There's a difference. He paused. I'm getting better at the difference. Yeah, Peter said. You are. He looked at Harry. You got the stone. Dumbledore's destroying it. Good call. Peter shifted on the rock. And Voldemort. Gone again, not gone gone, he'll be back at some point. He's been surviving on Will for 15 years, he'll find another way. Harry said it without drama. That's a future problem. A large one, probably, but future. Peter nodded. He didn't say don't worry about it, or you'll be ready when the time comes. He didn't say anything for a moment, just sat with the facts of it, which was one of the things Harry valued most about him, the ability to sit with hard things without needing to immediately resolve them into something more comfortable. Tell me about the year, Peter said, so Harry told him. Not the report version he'd given McGonagall and Dumbledore, the real one, the version with texture and specificity. He told him about the hat, about Snape and potions, about McGonagall saying Harry with his first name for the first time, about Hagrid and the warmth of him, about Fred and George and their structural assessment of the castle, about the chess game and the way Ron had played it, about Hermione doing the potions logic on her feet in 4 minutes with her notebook open. He told Peter about Draco Malfoy on the train and the conversation that had been something honest underneath its performance, and Peter listened with the attention he brought to things that had layers in them. He told him about Dumbledore, the conversation in the infirmary, the admission. He told it straight, no editorializing, and Peter listened to that too. What do you think of him? Peter said. Actually, Harry thought about it. He watched a giant squid tentacle emerge briefly from the lake and then submerge again with the dignity of something that had decided to make a point and considered it made. I think he's someone who genuinely loves the people he's responsible for and is simultaneously terrible at letting them be people rather than variables, he said. I think he's been carrying an enormous amount for a very long time, and it's made him assume that carrying things alone is just the way of it. He paused. I think he's going to try to manage me going forward, and I'm going to make it clear that that doesn't work, and we're going to have an interesting relationship. Interesting, Peter said. I'm not afraid of him, Harry said. I don't need to be. He's not a threat, not to me, not intentionally. He's a person with a paradigm that I don't fit into, and he's smart enough to know it even if it takes him time to adjust. He looked at Peter. He wants to meet you. Peter blinked. Me? You, Harry said. I think he's trying to understand how I ended up the way I am, and he's traced it back to the source. Peter looked out at the lake. What did you tell him? That you were the right choice, Harry said. Simply the way he said things that were true. Peter was quiet for a moment. He looked at the water and the mountains and the extraordinary school on the rock above them. He said, I keep thinking about that day, the platform sending you off. I had this. He stopped, started again. I've been doing this for 5 years. The training, the notebooks, all of it. And then you get on the train and you're in a world I can't follow you into, and I keep running the calculation of whether I gave you enough. You gave me everything I needed, Harry said. You don't know what was coming, Peter said. I didn't know what was coming. Neither did you, Harry said. When you started, you didn't know what I'd need. You made the best calls you could with the information you had, and you revised when you had better information. He looked at Peter. That's what good people do. Peter looked at him. You taught me that, Harry said, so I'm using it on you. Peter laughed. A real one, not his performing laugh, the one that started quiet and got there honestly. That's fair, he said. That's very fair. He shook his head. You're 11 years old. Almost 12, Harry said. You're almost 12 years old and you just defeated Voldemort. Incapacitated his temporary host, Harry corrected. He's not gone, and you're not worried. I'm informed, Harry said. That's different from not worried. I know what's coming roughly. I have time to prepare. And I have, he gestured, a small motion that encompassed the castle and the lake and Peter and the general shape of everything. I have people, and I have training, and I have a very good owl. Newton is excellent, Peter agreed. She is. Harry turned the notebook over in his hands. I talked to Ragnarok's office before the term ended. The Wednesday meeting before Christmas produced enough documentation to challenge the contested account formally. Matt has someone in London who knows the wizarding legal system. Apparently there's a whole parallel legal structure. Very old, not great on oversight mechanisms, but they have one and it applies. He paused. We can get the Wales property back. The documents from my parents, everything that was held, Peter nodded. His face was doing the listening thing, absorbing, reorganizing, the same process Harry had inherited from him so thoroughly it felt biological. What's in the Wales property? Don't know yet, Harry said. My best guess is that my parents left things there deliberately, off the main grid so to speak, things they didn't want easily found. He paused. It might be nothing. It might be significant. Either way I want it. We'll go, Peter said. Over the summer, sort it out properly. Over the summer I also want to, Harry stopped. What? I want to learn to drive, Harry said. Peter stared at him. Motorcycles specifically, Harry said. Been reading about engine mechanics and I think I could. You're 11. I know you could drive, I'd observe. That's not learning to drive, that's watching me drive. It's the first phase, Harry said patiently. Peter looked at the lake. He looked at Harry. He looked at the lake again. You have a plan for this. I have a framework, Harry said. The plan develops organically. Of course it does. Peter was quiet for a moment. Yeah, okay, over the summer, motorcycles. He shook his head. I'm going to have Dumbledore for lunch first, before we leave. He'd like that, Harry said. Bring the biscuits May makes. He'll respond well to that, I think. He's someone who communicates through food. The dinner feasts here are elaborate in ways that are genuinely about hospitality. He paused. Also, he has a thing for sweets. It's mentioned in several historical accounts. You've read historical accounts of Dumbledore's dietary preferences. It came up in the research. Harry turned his notebook over again. I think Snape is going to be a problem next year. Different kind of problem than this year. The same underlying issue, but with a longer runway now that Quirrell's gone, and he knows, I know, he was watching him. Harry had been thinking about this since January. He's conflicted about me. My father did something to him when they were at school, something significant that I don't have the details of, and he's been running that grudge against me since the beginning. But he also knew about Voldemort's movements before anyone else and was actively working against him, which means his actual allegiances are more complicated than his behavior implies. Peter was very quiet. He's going to be difficult, Harry said. But I think there's something worth engaging with under the difficulty. He's brilliant at potions. I've been working through the theory all year, and the depth of the subject is extraordinary. And he's the only person at this school who takes the subject seriously as a discipline rather than a class. He paused. I want to be good at it. I want him to teach me properly. What are the chances of that? Peter said. Unknown, Harry said, but higher than 0, which is a workable starting point. Ron and Hermione found them at the lakeside at 11, Madame Pomfrey having apparently decided that if the patients were going to be out of bed, they might as well be out of bed somewhere where the fresh air would do something useful. Ron came across the grass with the bruise on his jaw and his hands in his pockets, and Hermione had her bag and 3 books she'd brought from the infirmary specifically, because Hermione did not go anywhere without the potential for reading. Peter stood when they approached. Harry watched him assess them, the way he did with everyone, quick and comprehensive, and watched his face settle into something warm and genuine, the smile he had for people who had mattered to Harry. Peter Parker, he said. Ron Weasley. Hermione Granger. Ron shook his hand with the slight ceremony of someone meeting someone they've heard about and wants to make a good impression. Harry talks about you a lot, and then seemed to be not sure whether this was the right thing to say. He doesn't, Harry said. He does, Ron said. Not constantly, but things come up, and he says my guardian does this or Peter says that, and it's always something interesting. He looked at Peter. You taught him to climb things. Among other things, Peter said. He climbed the astronomy tower on the outside, Ron said. In October, for a look at the view, most people use the stairs. That sounds right, Peter said. Hermione had been holding back slightly, assessing which was her process she observed before she engaged. She said, you're a photographer. And a scientist, and she stopped. Peter looked at her. There's something else, she said. She had the expression she got when she was working toward a conclusion that she was fairly sure of but was giving due process to the uncertainty. Something that explains some things about Harry that don't have another explanation. The web shooter on his wrist, for instance. The way he moves in a crisis. The reed, she glanced at Harry. You told me the reed was something you developed through training. But it's also something he has naturally, which means there's a template, and the template. She stopped again. Harry looked at her with something that was genuinely delighted. You worked it out, he said. I worked out a hypothesis, she said. I didn't want to say it until I had more. It's correct, Harry said. Hermione looked at Peter. Peter looked at Harry. Harry made a small gesture that was essentially your call. Peter looked at the lake, then back at Ron and Hermione. He was quiet for a moment. Then he pushed back his sleeve and fired a web line at the rock 20 feet away, clean and precise, and let it retract. Ron's mouth opened. Hermione said, I knew it, in the flat tone of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed exactly as expected. You're Spider-Man, Ron said. His voice had gone an octave higher than usual. Yeah, Peter said. I've read there are articles, Yeah. Ron sat down on the ground. Not dramatically, his legs simply decided the grass was the appropriate elevation for this information. He sat cross-legged on the lakeside and looked at the water, then at Peter, then at Harry. And you've known, he said to Harry. Since I was 7, Harry said, and you didn't say anything. It wasn't mine to say, Harry said, but you're saying it now, Hermione pointed out. Because Peter decided, Harry said, not me. He looked at Ron on the grass. Are you okay? I'm fine, Ron said. I'm just recalibrating. He looked at Peter. Can you do the web swinging thing? The actual, yeah, Peter said. Could you? Ron gestured expansively at the lake, the castle, the Scottish morning. Ron, Hermione said, I'm just asking. Peter looked at the castle. He looked at the grounds, wide, clear, the earliest students coming out onto the grass now in the June morning. He looked at Harry. Harry shrugged, which was approximately why not. Peter went up. He went straight up, fired a line to the astronomy tower, and arced out across the lake in a long, clean swing that caught the morning light and threw it back in a way that was, there was no other word for it, beautiful. The kind of movement that looked effortless from the outside, specifically because of how much effort had gone into building it. He came around, back toward them, released at the apex, dropped, caught another line from the castle's outer wall, swung back and landed on the rock exactly where he'd started, 1 foot on each side of where Newton was sitting with magnificent dignity. The handful of students who'd come outside had stopped. 2 of them had their wands out, apparently unsure what classification this fell into. One of the portraits on the outer castle wall was leaning out of its frame. Ron, still sitting on the grass, said, Right, okay, yes, I understand now. Good, Harry said. That's yes, everything makes a lot more sense. Ron looked at Harry. You can do that too. A version of it, Harry said. Show me. Harry stood up, looked at the castle wall, produced the vine wood wand, and went up the wall with the focused ease of someone for whom this had been Tuesday for 3 years. He went to the second-story window ledge, looked back at them, and came back down. Hermione watched this with her notebook out and her pen moving. Harry sat back down. Ron stared at him. The students on the lawn were now conferring at volume about what they'd just seen. You're going to make the next 6 years very interesting, Ron said. That's what Hermione said, Harry noted. She's right, Ron said. She usually is. He looked at Hermione, and Hermione looked back at him, and there was something in that look that was the comfortable shorthand of people who had been through something together and had come out trusting each other on the other side. What does next year look like? Harry opened his notebook. Not 17. He'd started 18 on the train back from the 3rd floor last night, 3 pages of notes in the midnight hours when he couldn't sleep. Second year, he said, the magical curriculum expands. I want to be doing 4th-year material in most subjects by the end of it. I want to get better at wandless magic. I did a stupefy wandless last night, and it worked, but the form needs refinement. He looked at his notes. There are also things I want to understand about my connection to Voldemort. The Horcrux theory came up in my reading, obliquely. The restricted section had enough to draw inference, and I want to research it properly because if the theory is what I think it is, there's something I need to know about myself. Hermione's pen stopped. What do you mean something about yourself? I'm not sure yet, Harry said. It's a hypothesis. He closed the notebook. I'll tell you when I have enough to say. Harry, Hermione, he said, gently but clear. I will tell you when I know, okay? She looked at him for a moment. She was very good at this, Harry had found, at pushing to the point of what was reasonable and then trusting when he said not yet. It wasn't natural for her, the waiting. She did it anyway. Okay, she said. Peter was looking at Harry with the specific expression, the still one, the not commenting one. Harry met it for a moment. They'd talk about the Horcrux theory later, privately. Peter had done enough research on the wizarding world over the past year that Harry thought he was maybe 3 deductive steps away from it himself. There's also Ginny Weasley, Harry said to Ron. Ron looked up. My sister. She's coming to Hogwarts next year. I want to know her. He said it simply. From everything you've said, she's a specific kind of person, the kind worth knowing. Ron looked slightly surprised, then something warmer. She'd like that, he said. She'll probably pretend she won't at first. She's been talking about you since she was 5. He went slightly pink. I mean, you know, because of the general, she knows who you are is the point. She'll find out that the general idea isn't accurate, Harry said. That's fine, people usually do. Dumbledore came down to the lake at noon. He came alone, which Harry noted as a choice, and he walked across the grounds with his silver hair bright in the sun and his robes the particular blue of a good clear sky. And he had, Harry noticed, a tin of biscuits under his arm. He sat on the largest rock, across from their group, and looked at Peter with the focused and entirely benign attention of someone who was genuinely curious and had set aside any pretense of being in charge of the encounter. Mr. Parker, he said. Professor Dumbledore, Peter said. He said it with the easy respect of someone who takes people seriously without being intimidated by them. I understand I owe you an apology, Dumbledore said. Among other things, a boy in your care was placed in significant danger in my institution, and he paused. I had constructed a situation in which his role was predetermined and his agency was not fully accounted for. He accounted for his own agency, Peter said. That's the thing about actually preparing someone, you don't get to control the outcome. They do. Dumbledore looked at Peter for a long moment. Indeed, he said, that is precisely the thing. He opened the tin, biscuits. He held it out to Ron first because he was, Harry thought, someone who paid attention to the room. Ron took 2, Hermione took 1, Harry took 1. Peter looked at the tin, looked at Dumbledore, and took 1. He told me you think in chess, Peter said, not in people. He is perceptive, Dumbledore said. He's been perceptive since he was 7, Peter said. 7-year-olds don't usually have that kind of precision unless someone's been taking them seriously for a while. He ate the biscuit. He looked out at the lake. I want to be clear about something. Please, Dumbledore said. Whatever's coming, whatever Voldemort becomes, whatever the next round of this is, Harry is going to be in the middle of it. I know that. He knows that. He's not going to hide from it, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't coming. Peter looked at Dumbledore directly. But he's not a weapon. He's not a strategy. He's not a piece you move to where the calculation says it'll do the most good. He's a person who happens to be very good at a lot of things, and those two facts need to coexist in your mind simultaneously. Dumbledore held his gaze. You are very clear, he said. I try to be, Peter said. He is fortunate, Dumbledore said quietly, looking at Harry, to have someone who is. He said it without sentimentality, as a fact, with the weight of someone who understood what the alternative looked like from the inside. Harry looked at the lake. There was a long, comfortable silence in which biscuits were eaten and Newton appeared from somewhere and sat on Peter's shoulder with proprietorial satisfaction, and the lake made its lake sounds, and the castle above them went about its day, and somewhere inside it Quirrell was in the infirmary and Snape was probably doing something acerbic, and in a vault in Gringotts, a contested account was waiting to be properly argued. Next year, Ron said eventually, to no one in particular. Second year, what do we think? Harder, Hermione said. The curriculum gets considerably more complex and will be expected to build on first-year foundations. Probably another catastrophic event, Ron said cheerfully. There seems to be a pattern. I'm hoping to reduce the catastrophe per year rate, Harry said. You faced down Voldemort in the first year, Ron said. The bar is set quite high. I'm aware. I'm saying, relatively speaking, whatever happens in second year might seem. Ron, Hermione said. What? Stop tempting it. Ron subsided. He ate another biscuit. He looked at the mountains, the lake, the castle, with the expression of someone who had arrived at Hogwarts 3 months ago expecting an ordinary school year and had found something considerably more interesting, and had decided this was fine, was good actually, was exactly the kind of thing he'd been looking for without knowing he was looking. Harry watched the water. He thought about the letter in his inside pocket. Trust your gut. Your gut is brilliant. He thought about the basement vault and the bench in Queens and the morning on the fire escape, when the idea of climbing a wall for the first time had felt enormous and now felt like breathing. He thought about the hat saying the bone-deep kind about his courage, which he still wasn't sure he agreed with but was willing to hold as a possibility. He thought about what was coming, not with dread, not quite, the Horcrux theory if it held, the Wales property, the contested account, Voldemort regrouping somewhere, will looking for another vehicle, patient and cold, and certain that the gap between them would eventually close in his favor. The second year of a 7-year education in a discipline he'd only had access to for 11 months and was already finding insufficiently paced. Snape, who was a problem with potential. Dumbledore, who was a resource with limitations. A whole world with opinions about who Harry Potter was supposed to be, waiting to see if he'd become it. He thought, there's a lot to do. He thought, good, Peter was looking at him. Harry looked back. Peter tilted his head the way he did when he was asking a question without words, and Harry tilted his slightly back, which was the answer, and Peter nodded once and they both went back to the lake. A beetle landed on Harry's notebook. He looked at it. It was very large, with peculiar eyes that caught the light oddly. He watched it for a moment with the specific quality of attention he brought to things that felt slightly wrong. Then he closed the notebook, and the beetle flew away, and he made a note in the margin of his internal file to look into the question of animagi and press passes. Later, one thing at a time. The end-of-year feast that evening was Gryffindor's, points counted, cups awarded, the Great Hall decked in red and gold, while the Slytherin decorations that Snape had ordered gone from the ceiling were replaced by something Professor Flitwick had executed with his usual cheerful precision. Harry sat between Ron and Hermione and ate and listened to the noise of it, the specific warm chaos of several hundred people being happy in the same room, and thought that this was the thing you couldn't train for, the thing that crept up on you, belonging somewhere, not owning it, not being owed it, just being in a place that had made room for you and making room for it in return. Hagrid found him after dinner, outside the Great Hall, and bent down and hugged him with the force of someone the size of a house who had decided that restraint was for people who didn't feel things as strongly as he did. Harry let himself be hugged, which was something he'd gotten considerably better at over 5 years, and Hagrid said, "Proud oh yeah, Harry," in a voice that was doing its best to stay steady and not quite managing. "Thank you, Hagrid," Harry said, "for looking after me since September." "Oh, I didn't," Hagrid waved a hand. "You didn't need looking after, did ya? Not really." "Everyone needs looking after," Harry said, "in different ways." Hagrid looked at him with his enormous, kind, slightly wet eyes. "Your mum used to say something like that," he said. "She had a way of seeing people properly." He stopped. "Thought you should know that." Harry held that for a moment. "Thanks," he said. "I'd like to hear more about her, when you feel like talking." "Any time," Hagrid said immediately. "Any time, Harry." He found Peter in the entrance hall, waiting with his bags and Newton's cage, because the end-of-year train was tomorrow, but Peter had sorted accommodation in Hogsmeade for the night, and Harry had gotten special dispensation from McGonagall to spend the night there, which she granted with the expression of someone who knew when a rule was less important than the thing requiring the exception. They walked down to Hogsmeade in the June evening, through the grounds, past the lake where it held the last of the light, up the path through the trees. "Hagrid told me about my mum," Harry said. "Just a little. He said she had a way of seeing people." "Yeah," Peter said. "She sounds like she did." "I think I got that," Harry said. "The seeing people thing from her." "I think so too. And from you," Harry said. "You're also very good at seeing people. You saw me in a cupboard when nobody else had." He walked for a moment. "So I got it from both ends." "Lucky," Peter said, meaning it completely. "Yeah," Harry said. "I think so." Hogsmeade at evening was warm windows and wood smoke, and the sound of the 3 broomsticks from down the lane. They found the inn Peter had booked small, clean, the landlady unruffled by the owl or by Peter's camera bag or by any of it, just pointed them to the rooms with brisk efficiency and put 2 mugs of something hot on the table without being asked. Harry sat and drank the something hot, which turned out to be a magical hot chocolate that tasted considerably better than any hot chocolate had a right to, and looked out the window at the village settling into its evening. "Summer," he said. "Summer," Peter agreed. "Wales, the property, the Gringotts meeting." Harry turned the mug in his hands. "And then 2nd year, and somewhere in there motorcycles," Peter said. "I have a framework," Harry said. "You have a framework for motorcycles you're too young to legally operate." "The framework doesn't specify legality," Harry said. "It's more of a principles document." Peter looked at him. "A principles document," he said, in the tone of someone who has been outmaneuvered by an 11-year-old and is choosing to find it funny rather than alarming. "Of course." Newton settled from her cage to Harry's shoulder and made the sound she made that he'd come to understand as approval of current circumstances. He reached up and let her bite his finger very gently, which was her version of affection and which he'd learned to receive without flinching. "I want to write the letter tonight," Harry said. "To Gringotts, start the formal process on the contested account. It's 10 o'clock at night." "I want to write it tonight," Harry said. "I'll send it in the morning." Peter slid him a piece of notepaper across the table. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." Harry wrote the letter. It was precise, formal, specific, and 3 paragraphs long. He signed it Harry James Potter with the full name, the one from the notebook on the first magic experiment, the one that had both his parents in it. He folded it. He put it in his jacket pocket. He looked at the window, the dark village, the stars above Scotland doing what stars do. He thought, there is a lot of world and there is a great deal left to understand, and most of the questions are still open, and that is exactly as it should be. He thought, I am 11 years old and I know who I am, and I know what I can do, and I know who I trust, and the rest is just what happens next. He thought, bring it. Outside in the village, something small and nocturnal moved through the hedgerows, and the mountains were dark above the tree line, and the Hogwarts castle sat on its rock above the lake with its lights burning against the Scottish sky, and somewhere in it, 1,000 years of magic were going about their evening. Harry Potter drank his hot chocolate and opened Notebook 18. He wrote at the top, Year 2, what I know, what I need to know, what comes next. Below it he wrote a list, long and specific and occasionally crossed out and revised, the way all good lists are. He wrote until midnight, then he went to sleep.